This all happened when I was living in a dingy old flat in Nakameguro during my first year as a working adult. Back then I was determined to save money. I wasn't making much in my entry-level job, so I had to pick a flat that was within my limited budget. I found a cheap, worn-down place that had clearly seen better days. It was a 1DK, a single room with a tiny dining room kitchen in a 20-year-old building. The bathroom was practically a cubbyhole, a cramped unit bath with barely enough room to turn around in. The walls were so paper-thin that you could hear everything the neighbors were doing. I'm talking about every little sound. If the guy next door sneezed, I'd hear it. When their phone vibrated, it felt like the walls themselves were trembling. I didn't mind too much. After all, I was out most of the day working. I'd come back only to eat, shower, and catch up on sleep. At the time, the state of the place and the sounds from next door were nothing more to me than a minor inconvenience. Then it started. I remember the first time it happened. I came home one evening after a long day at work. I dropped my laptop bag by the door and was just about to head into the room when I felt it. An odd tingling sensation, as if I'd walked straight into a spider's web. You know that feeling, don't you? That sticky, clinging sensation that catches on your skin, lingering on your face and arms. The spider's web. I brushed my hands across my face, and there was nothing there. I thought little of it at first. A place like this was bound to have spiders, and worse. It wasn't unusual to find the odd cockroach scurrying around the floor, and if there were roaches, surely there would be spiders too, preying on them. So I brushed it off as a spiderweb I couldn't see, and carried on with my night. But then it happened again, and again. Every time I came home from work, I felt that strange sensation, like invisible threads clinging to my face. I would stop in my tracks, frantically swiping the air around me, convinced there must be a web. And I hated spiders. But I could never find anything. No web, no spider, nothing. After a while, the sensation became more persistent, more deliberate. It wasn't just brushing against my skin anymore. It felt like something was deliberately touching me, caressing my skin, something unseen. I started feeling it almost every time I stepped through the door, and with that, the air inside my flat felt somehow different, heavier, like it was pressing down on me, suffocating. The once harmless feeling of walking into a web had become something sinister, something that made the hairs on the back of my neck stand on end. Eventually, I had had enough. I tore through the flat, searching every corner, every crevice for a nest, for spiders, or anything that could explain what was happening. I left no stone unturned, checked every inch of the walls, the ceiling, even behind the fridge. But there were no webs, no spiders, just me alone with a gnawing sense that something was wrong. I did find a cockroach though, and I killed it on the spot. I considered the idea that it could be strands of my hair blown by the wind when I opened the door. My hair was long enough to brush my ears, so maybe I was just being paranoid. Feeling stray strands tickling my face. But no, that didn't really explain it. I checked the mirror, carefully examining for loose hairs, also my hair, after I had a bath or a shower to see if I was losing it. But I realized that the sensation wasn't from my own hair. It was different, and worse, it was getting stronger. The next evening, as soon as I stepped inside, I felt it again, but this time, it wasn't just a brief touch. It was like something invisible was wrapping around my face, sliding down my cheek, as if trying to get my attention. A deep sense of dread settled over me, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something unseen was watching me. Waiting. Weeks passed with the same eerie occurrences. Then one day, In a desperate attempt to take my mind off of the flat's suffocating atmosphere, I invited two of my colleagues, let's just call them A and B, over for drinks. The mood at work had been tense, and a few beers and some casual conversation seemed like a good way to unwind. As we chatted about our living situations, I made the mistake of mentioning my flat's dilapidated state. "You wouldn't believe how run down my place is," I said, half joking, not realizing what those words would set in motion. To my surprise, A and B seemed intrigued, to say the least. They were saying things like, "We gotta see this place," and they insisted. And before I knew it, we were stopping by a convenience store to pick up some drinks and snacks, and then heading back to my flat. When we arrived, I saw A's eyes widen with surprise. "It's even worse than I expected," he said, laughing, clearly amused by the sorry state of the building. That kind of annoyed me, so I gave him a playful shove and said, "Shut up." I unlocked the door and I invited them inside. But as I held the door open, I noticed B standing there, frozen, his eyes locked on the entrance to my flat. He wasn't just staring though. He was completely spaced out, as if something had shocked him. So I say, "B, you coming in or what?" And he barely responds. Yeah?" His voice hollow. He walked in slowly, like he was stepping into something unpleasant. I thought he might have been drunk already, but we hadn't even started drinking yet. "Are you alright?" I said, giving him a concerned look. His eyes darted around the room nervously before he forced a weak smile and said, "Yeah, I'm fine." But there was something off about him. His movements were stiff, awkward, like he was trying to keep his balance, like something was bothering him. We sat down and drank, though the mood was strange from the start. A and I cracked jokes, and we talked about work, but B remained quiet, barely saying a word. He kept glancing around the room, as if expecting something to leap out at him. I tried to ignore it, but the uneasy atmosphere was starting to get to me. Eventually, it was time for them to leave. We called a taxi, and while waiting for it to arrive, we stood outside to get some fresh air. B had been acting strange the whole night, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was seriously wrong. I walked them downstairs and waited with them for their taxi, and then, out of nowhere, B asked, "Is your flat an accident property?" "What?" I blinked, confused. "No, I don't think so. Of course not." B's face was pale. "There's a woman there. She hanged herself." A and I stared at him, completely stunned. A let out a nervous laugh, almost choking on his cigarette. "You can see that sort of thing?" he asked, incredulous. B nodded slowly, his eyes dark. "I don't always see them, but when I walked into your flat, I saw her. She's been hanging there the whole time." I felt my blood run cold. "Why didn't you say anything earlier?" I demanded, my voice shaking. I was angry. Or was he just making it up? Or was he onto something? "I couldn't," he said in response, his voice barely above a whisper. "She was staring right at me. If I said anything, I was afraid I'd be cursed. She seemed so hate-filled." "Where the hell did you see her? I need to know," I blurted out. "She was hanging just off of the ground by the front door. I guess that's where she ended things," he muttered. The moment he said that, everything clicked. The sensation of the spider webs, the constant feeling of something brushing against my face. I realized it wasn't a web. It was her hair. I had been walking through her hair every time I entered my flat. There was this coat hook on the back of the first internal door as you step into the flat. It was practically hanging out of the wall, It was an old, brass, really strong one. I now know why it was almost out of the wall. The realization hit me, like a wave of ice, and I felt the blood drain from my face. My legs went weak beneath me. "Why the hell would you tell me this now?" I shouted. I felt the panic rising in my chest. "You're leaving and I'm going to be stuck there alone." But before they could respond, the taxi pulled up. A gave a sympathetic smile. "Good luck with that," he said, as if it were some joke. And while B raised his hand in apology, they both climbed into the cab and drove off, leaving me alone with my thoughts. I didn't waste any time. I grabbed the essentials and I fled to a nearby all-night manga cafe. I spent the night there. From that moment on, I knew I couldn't bring myself to sleep in that flat again. I started searching for a new place immediately, bouncing between A and B's flats and different cafes until I found somewhere else to live. When moving day finally came, A and B helped me pack up and leave that cursed apartment behind. I didn't care how cheap it had been. I would never step foot into that place again. Years have gone by, but I was reminded of my experience a few months ago. I had some business back in Nakameguro, so out of curiosity, I wandered past the old flat, wondering if anyone had moved in. The building still stood, still as decrepit as ever, but I noticed an umbrella propped outside the door of the apartment I used to live in. Someone was living there now. I wonder if they've felt it yet. The spider's web. Or if they've seen her. But none of that's my concern anymore, is it? It was about 5 years ago when my mother worked for a company that partnered with my dad's firm. Her boss, a big personality, let's call him Mr. Kawamoto. He was known for his moods. On a good day, he was gruff but manageable. But on a bad day, he was explosive. If you even asked him something as small as, "Could you check this document?" he'd scowl, snap at you, and sometimes even throw things, phones, files, papers. All would fly in his fits of anger. People would keep a safe distance, watching his temper flare up like a storm. He would only flare up like that now and then, though. But whenever it happened, it was best to stay out of his way. One evening after a particularly long day at work, my mother came home with that weary look, the one that warned of a hard day. "The boss was impossible today. I can't understand why he gets like this," she muttered, staring out at the night sky. She mentioned something odd too. "Full moon," she said, glancing up at it, as if connecting the dots. She hadn't noticed before, but it became something of a pattern. His moods, it seemed to align with the full moon. She even began dreading those nights, knowing that the next day would be a nightmare. Then one day something happened that none of them could have foreseen. Out of nowhere, Mr. Kawamoto passed away. There was no illness, no accident, it was just sudden. They called it a heart attack or some sort of cardiac failure. It left everyone stunned. Maybe it was the stress, or perhaps karoshi, overworking. People whispered after years of carrying that much anger. But here's where things get strange. The night before he died, he apparently turned to his wife and said, "Tomorrow I'm gonna die." Just like that. Calm, matter of fact, like it was a planned appointment in his diary. His wife was understandably horrified. She thought he was joking in that dark, unsettling way of his. "You shouldn't say things like that," she scolded, pushing the thought away, like she could make it disappear by brushing it aside. Still, something about it gnawed at her. Later that night she asked him, "Why would you say something like that, about dying tomorrow?" And here's where it gets really weird. He looked at her completely bewildered, as if she was the one saying the bizarre things. "What are you talking about? I never said that," he insisted, his face blank. He was genuinely puzzled, so much so that she thought she'd imagined it. But oddly enough, that night, he sat down and wrote what looked like a will, and then he went to bed, and the next morning, he was gone. In the weeks after, my mother started having dreams about him. It was never subtle. He'd be there standing beside her bedside, as if he'd simply walked out of the office. But there was a desperation to him, a haunted look in his eyes. He'd say things like, Why is my desk gone? Why isn't anybody saving my seat?" Each time my mum would calmly reply in her dream, "You don't work there anymore. You passed away. Remember?" And each time his reaction was the same. He'd stare, eyes widening, face growing tense, and he'd shake his head very slowly, whispering, "I'm not dead. I'm not dead." His voice would rise with every word, the denial choking out of him, echoing in the room until she woke up in a cold sweat, heart pounding. One day at work, she casually mentioned it to some colleagues, half expecting them to laugh it off or, make a mockery of her in front of everybody. But as she spoke, she noticed the uneasy expressions on their faces. They knew. They had seen him too. It was the same story every time. He'd visit them in their dreams, asking about his seat, his desk, muttering that he wasn't dead. Even his wife had been dreaming about him. Sometimes he'd just stand by the foot of her bed, silent and still, his face twisted in disbelief, and other times he'd just whisper it over and over, as if hoping she'd confirm it for him, as if saying it enough times would make it true. "I am not dead. I am not dead." When my mum told me all this, it gave me the chills. The way she described his face and that stubborn look of terror, that refusal to accept that he was gone, it was like he had become a shadow of himself, stuck somewhere between the world of the living and the dead. And the strangest part, though the part that none of them could shake off, was the timing of his death. You see, he had died on the night of a full moon. To this day, my mum says that she still dreams of him every now and then. It's never anything violent or scary, but there's something unsettling about it. He just stands there, caught in the dream, staring at her with the same disbelief. Although all these years had passed, his voice low, a desperate whisper, "I'm not dead. I'm not dead." She tells herself it's just a memory, just a remnant of her time working for him, some kind of unanswered stress that she has inside her. Sometimes, though, she wonders if his spirit is still lingering somewhere, unwilling or unable to move on. I often walk my dog in my quiet neighborhood. I want to share with you a really creepy thing that happened one night when I was out walking the dog. I wasn't drunk or overtired or anything. I was wide awake. I had walked around the block as per usual, and I was heading down the street which leads to my home. I stopped in my tracks when I heard a weird noise. It sounded like a voice echoing. It was almost as if it was coming from a speaker or something. I couldn't quite make out what that voice was saying, though. I noticed that I had stopped outside a house in my neighborhood. I felt for sure that the voice was coming from within that house. I could clearly hear it coming from that direction. The house itself was very old, and it's been here for as long as I can remember. I remember it from when I was young, even though I didn't live in the neighborhood. That house was in the process of being demolished. Demolition had begun about 2 or 3 days ago. there was rope and barriers to prevent anyone going in there. I think that the place had been long abandoned, and I was glad it was finally getting sorted out. The place was overgrown with weeds and was beginning to rot. It was kind of an eyesore. Anyways, I had no idea who lived there, or if someone was squatting in there, or something like that. I thought that it was empty, so when I heard this weird echoey voice coming from inside, I was pretty sketched out. It sounded like it was in pain and it was suffering. I guess I could describe it as a dry-throated groaning, kind of like someone doing a vocal warm-up incredibly slowly and they were stuck on a low ah sound. Or like when you go to the doctors and you have to say ah. It was so creepy. It wasn't a regular rhythm, so I found it hard to convince myself that I had mistaken it for a mechanical sound. It was irregular, and it made me feel pretty scared. I didn't know what to do. I didn't like it, and something inside me told me to keep moving and get home. As soon as I moved away from the front of that house, the creepy moaning stopped. Now, if there was someone in that abandoned house who was trying to freak me out by using some radio or speaker, then it should have faded away as I walked off, but it didn't. It just stopped. It was at this point my dog, who is usually so good at standing guard, started to nervously shift around. Well, I took that as a sign to get on my way. I jogged back home with the dog, and that night I had 3 withheld number calls, and when I picked up, the caller was silent. It was creepy, but I mean, it's not like it doesn't happen every now and then. It was just coincidental, I guess. I was pretty spooked out that night, but nothing else happened. I found out something a little later on. Since I was curious, I used every opportunity to ask my neighbors and the people who lived in the neighborhood about that house. It turns out that there was an old man who lived in there by himself until a few years back, when he passed away. His wife passed away a few years before he did, and they had suffered from the same disease. His son and his wife decided to sell the land the house stood on, and that's why it was being demolished. I don't know all the details, and I could never take hearsay as gospel, but the story around the neighborhood was that the old man and his wife suffered with a disease that affected the lungs and the throat. The disease apparently led to a long and painful death for the old man. He took that road alone in the home. He saw out his final days in apparent agony. So I can't help but think that that moaning sound I heard that night could have been him. Perhaps his spirit is still in there. It was really creepy, but I hope he's at peace now. This is something that happened to me a few years back, when I was away on a business trip. That day I had traveled from Tokyo to a certain prefecture in the Tokai region for work. It was supposed to be a pretty straightforward trip, but the plans suddenly changed. The next day I had to head in a completely different direction than originally scheduled, so I decided to stay overnight in a city. Let's call it Y City, since it would be more convenient for the following morning. While tapping around on my phone looking for hotels, I found that almost everything was either fully booked or way out of budget, probably because it was such short notice. In the end, I managed to find one listing that just barely fit into my company's business travel budget. Back then, the company I'd worked for had a set policy. No matter how cheap your hotel stay is, you would get reimbursed a fixed nightly allowance. So I had this habit of deliberately booking the cheapest possible hotels and pocketing the difference as secret spending money. My wife didn't know, of course. It was my hidden little fund. The website for this particular hotel had a pretty bold statement on its homepage. Windowless rooms available at a great discount. Well, that should have been a red flag, but I didn't think much of it. I was checking in late night anyway. I'd be leaving early in the morning. It's just a place to sleep. I wasn't going to miss a window for the night, so I thought, Why the hell not? And I booked it. I arrived and got out of the elevator on my floor, and the first thing I noticed was how weird the atmosphere was. The hallway was dim and lifeless. There was this oppressive stillness hanging in the air, a kind of silence that just feels off. But I shrugged it off. It's a cheap hotel. What do you expect? My room was right in the middle of the building. If you imagine the hotel floor layout like the Japanese kanji for enclosure, which is basically a square within a square, my room was located right in the inner square, boxed in by hallways and the other rooms. It had no windows at all, just 4 walls, a ceiling and a door. The room was a twin, so I decided to spread my luggage out on one of the beds and just use the other for sleeping. I was pretty worn out, so I took a quick shower and got into bed and started dozing off. That's when I thought I heard something. A chime, a doorbell, just once, faint enough that it might have been part of my dream. It startled me awake though, but not fully. I figured it was probably just some drunk salaryman coming back from a night out in the nearby entertainment district and accidentally pressing the wrong room's intercom button. That thing kinda happens, right? I let my eyes close again and readied myself to slip back to sleep. But then, I heard the chime again. Twice. This time it was clear, loud, real, 2 deliberate rings. That's when it hit me like a jolt of electricity. This room doesn't have an intercom. No bell. None of the rooms do. This is an absolute bare bones, no frills business hotel. There's not even room service. No reason to install intercoms. Why would there be a doorbell? As I lay there frozen, trying to rationalize it, another sound joined the room. Patter, patter, patter. The unmistakable sound of a child's footsteps running down the hallway. It started far away, had the edge of hearing, but then steadily grew louder, closer. And then, without the door ever opening, those footsteps came into the room. And I could not move. I heard the sound of someone bouncing on the unused bed. The mattress springs squeaked and groaned, as if something small and light jumped up and down. And then a child's laughter, soft, high-pitched, playful. The giggle of a kid lost in their own world. As I lay there, still, every muscle locked up in fear, my breath even caught in my throat, I thought, if I don't open my eyes, if I pretend to be asleep, maybe it'll go away. I squeezed my eyes shut tighter. That was about the only part of my body I had any control over, and I tried to breathe slowly, calmly. And then I felt it. A tiny hand tapping my cheek, and then my shoulder, like a child trying to get my attention, like they wanted me to play. The hand was ice cold. Not the cold of an air-conditioned room, but something deeper, something bone deep. Tap, tap, tap. I didn't move, I didn't react. I just kept pretending to be asleep. Eventually the presence faded, and the pressure on the bed vanished, and the room returned to silence. No more footsteps, no more laughter, no more hands. Just silence. Eventually, I fell asleep, or maybe passed out, I really can't remember. The next morning I woke up and immediately checked out without saying much to the front desk. I just didn't want to look back. And to this day I wonder if that night was just a dream, a stress-induced hallucination maybe. Maybe it was my imagination playing tricks on me. Well, that's what I like to tell myself anyway. But the realness of it, the sound of the laughter, the touch of those small, cold hands, those are things I can never forget. Even now when I stay in hotels for work, I avoid windowless rooms. That was the single most terrifying experience of my life, and whether it was a dream or something else, I never want to find out. I've stayed in lots of hotels since then, some fancy, some falling apart, but I've never booked a windowless room again. And lately there's something I can't stop thinking about. That room, that one room boxed in like a tomb, with no light, no air, no view. What if it used to have a window? What if there was a reason they sealed it up? I did a little digging once, nothing serious, just curiosity, and it turns out a lot of those inner rooms in older hotels, they weren't always rooms. Some used to be storage, some had balconies, and in some cases, they used to have windows. Until something happened. I keep wondering, what if a child stayed there once? What if they were left alone? What if they opened the window looking for air or someone to play with and never came back inside? What if the hotel sealed the window, not to save money, but to keep whatever's in there from getting out? I don't know. Maybe I'm just letting my imagination run away with me. But that night, when I felt those tiny hands tapping at my cheek, when I heard that laugh just inches from my face, that didn't feel like a dream. It felt like someone who wasn't supposed to be alone was still waiting, still playing, and just wanted a friend. This happened about 4 years ago, when I was in college. Back then, I didn't really care about credits or attendance, really. I was enjoying the college life a little too much. My university was out in the middle of the countryside, which meant that there wasn't all that much to do at night. So I would often go on road trips and night drives with 3 regular friends. It was a warm summer night, and we were being idiots like we usually did. My friend was clinging to the roof of the car while I drove. He wanted to see how long he could hold on for. I saw Jackie Chan do it, and I thought it would be really cool if we could do it. This should go without saying, but please don't try this. It's really stupid, and he could have died. So, he was on the roof, and one of my friends shouted out of the window that we had hit 40 kilometers an hour, which is about 25 miles per hour. "That's enough, stop, I'm gonna fall," he said. "You give up? I'll show you no mercy," I said. I started to slow down a little. I wasn't a monster, I was just kidding. "Stop the car, man, I'm really gonna..." Then I heard a dull thud on the road behind. I felt an instant sense of dread rise from the pit of my stomach. I called out to my friend, and I didn't get a response. I looked in the rearview mirror and saw my friend was lying there in the road. I pulled over and ran over to him. Fortunately, because I had slowed down, he didn't seem that injured. The only thing is that he broke his watch. I asked him what happened, and if he lost his grip. He said that he didn't lose his grip. He was distracted by something, and he just pointed towards the moon. "It's just the moon, you dumbass," I said. "Look closer, you dumbass," he said. When I looked closer, I could see something flying through the air. It was glowing purple. Was this a UFO? It was a flying object I had never seen before, so that's what it felt like. I stood there dumbstruck, staring at the purple flying object. It was really bright. We had driven up to this observation area in the mountains, usually popular in the day, but quiet at nighttime. I experienced a different kind of fear that day. Sure, I have been scared by horror films and the thought of a home invader or something, but I had never been so deeply chilled by the presence of something so incomprehensible, so inconceivable. I think that all 4 of us were experiencing this new sense of terror. We were literally shaking. That flying object, it was shimmering. It seemed to have an ability to teleport. It had now moved closer to the summit of the mountain, closer to where we were. "We have to check this out, guys," one of my friends said. About that guy. He was 22, a self-proclaimed stud despite being a virgin. How the hell did this guy become the most confident in our little friend group all of a sudden? My fear was overpowered by my curiosity. I mean, it was a once-in-a-lifetime experience. I had to go. And through the power of convincing, my other 2 friends gave us the okay sign. We drove towards this shimmering object, full of a mix of fear and excitement. I remember clearly that one of my friends said the light must be coming from some sort of construction lamp nearby. The instant my friend said that, we heard a terribly loud noise coming from the direction of the light. It was hurting my ears. My friend asked me to pull over. He looked as if he was about to cry. Before I stopped the car, I felt like I hit something and ran it over. We were all visibly in pain, and now curiosity gave way to panic. We were sweating profusely. I could see it teeming off our brows. I had to get out and check the damage to the car. My dad made me keep a flashlight in the glove box. I still do to this day. There was no damage to the car. Off in the distance, we heard that crushing sound. It sounded like the snapping of giant trees. It was monstrous. I just wanted to get in the car and get away. We couldn't stop the ringing in our ears. It was really scary. I shouted to everyone to get back in the car. The shining object in the sky was moving again. It was descending the mountain in a straight line. It was approaching our direction with some speed. I felt like this couldn't possibly be happening. I shouted at them to hurry up and get in the car, and once we were all in, I sped away from the light. I must have broken some speed rules that night. Maybe I was channeling my inner Jackie Chan, who knows. Everyone was silent in the car. We went to a convenience store at the bottom of the mountain. It for some reason felt safe there. The shining purple UFO thing seemed to hover in place where I thought I hit something, and then we watched as the light slowly faded into the dark. I have no idea what the hell happened that night, but it felt like something otherworldly. We told our friends about that night, and unsurprisingly, no one believed us. What was that thing in the sky? A new government-tested aircraft? A UFO? I guess we'll never know. Whatever it was, only the four of us saw it. My dad used to work night shifts, often getting home around 3 or 4 in the morning. His job kept him out late, so the streets were always deserted by the time he'd head back. He drove to work, but instead of parking at our block of flats, he'd leave the car at my grandparents' house, which was just down the road. Now, right near my grandparents' place, about 100 meters away, there was this small, old cemetery. As a kid, I remember walking past it a few times. One day, when the gate was left slightly ajar, curiosity got the better of me, and I decided to sneak inside. The iron gate creaked when you pushed it open, leading to a narrow path with a row of 6 stone Jesus statues on the left. The graves themselves were all crammed together, large and small, creating a kind of claustrophobic feeling as you walked between them. During the day, the place didn't seem so bad, but at night, different story. The area was dark and quiet, with hardly any houses nearby. It always felt like the kind of place you'd want to avoid after sunset, like the shadows themselves were watching you. One particular night after a long shift, my dad was driving back, and for some reason, he was really craving a fizzy drink. You know how it is when you've got that one thing on your mind and nothing else will do. Well, that's how he says he felt. So he stopped at a couple of vending machines near our place. They were all sold out. Frustrated, he remembered that there was a machine right next to the old hairdressers by the cemetery. It was past 3 a.m., and the streets were dead quiet. No one was around, not a soul. The only sounds were his own footsteps and the soft hum of the wind. As he got closer to the cemetery, something felt off. You know that feeling when the air just seems heavier, like something's about to happen. That's how he described it later. Suddenly, he heard faint voices in the distance. He thought it was a group of people maybe having a late-night drink or something. But it seemed strange. Who would be out this late? And why here of all places? He kept walking, and the voices grew louder. Laughter, clinking glasses, and muffled chatter. Like there was a whole group having a party nearby. Who in their right mind is drinking at this time of night, he thought. And then it hit him. The voices weren't coming from the street or any nearby house. They were coming from inside the cemetery. He stopped, dead in his tracks, feeling his stomach churn with unease. The very thought felt disrespectful, like tempting fate. Why were people doing that? But determined to get his drink, he kept moving. By now he was at the vending machine, his hand hovering over the buttons. He could still hear those eerie party sounds coming from behind him, somewhere in the cemetery. And though he was trying not to pay attention, something about the laughter he had heard had changed. It had become strange, distorted, almost hollow, like it was echoing from far away, not in a normal way. He pressed the button, and with a loud clunk, a can of fizzy drink dropped out. The second it did, everything went silent. Completely silent. The sudden absence of noise was more unsettling than the laughter had been. His pulse quickened. He grabbed the can, trying not to look over his shoulder, but that awful feeling of being watched crept over him. It felt like eyes were boring into his back, urging him to turn around, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. His instincts told him something wasn't right. Something was waiting. His heart was racing now. He turned away from the vending machine and started walking back, a little faster this time. Then he heard it. Soft footsteps behind him, slow and deliberate. First he thought it was his imagination, but the sound grew louder, closer, like someone or something was following him. The cemetery was just to his left now, the shadowy graves barely visible under the dim streetlights. He knew he shouldn't look, but curiosity tugged at him. Against his better judgment, he glanced sideways, and that's when he saw it. A figure stood amongst the gravestones, tall, motionless, and too far away to make out clearly, but what chilled him to the bone was the way it was just staring straight at him, unmoving, with an intense gaze that seemed to pierce through the darkness. No one else was there, just that single figure in the middle of the cemetery. Dad's body went cold. He wanted to run, but his legs felt like lead. So he decided to get back to his car. The safety of the car seemed like heaven. He tore his eyes away, picked up his pace, and tried to act like he hadn't seen anything. But the feeling of being followed grew stronger. It was as if that figure was getting nearer, closing in on him, but without making a sound. He was nearly at his car when he dared to glance back. And this time, it was right behind him, a man, pale as death, standing by the gate, watching him with cold, emotionless eyes. Panicked, Dad bolted for the car, his breath coming in sharp gasps. As he reached for the door handle, the hairs on the back of his neck stood up. He didn't look back this time. He just jumped into his car, locked the doors, and sped off. "I was so scared I nearly collapsed right there," he admitted to me later. To this day, he refuses to walk past that cemetery at night. And every time we drive by, he brings up that story, still shaken by what he saw, or what he thought he saw, that night. He told me that he believes in the possibility that he saw a person rather than a spirit that night. And to me, that makes his experience all the more frightening. Someone alone drinking and laughing in amongst the tombstones that just stares at you. Well, that would be enough to send me running too. I ride a motorcycle. I don't really use maps. I like to ride aimlessly. Just head wherever the road takes me. But once, that habit led me straight into something seriously messed up. So I figured I'd write it down, just in case it helps someone. It was a few years ago. I was cruising through the mountains, way out in the countryside. One of those places so remote you just stop seeing vending machines or traffic signs. Which was annoying because I was looking for a drink at the time. I finally found a vending machine beside a gravel road, half hidden behind some trees. I stopped to buy a bottle of green tea. I was just leaning against my bike, drinking, when this local-looking old guy walked up and started talking to me. "Where you headed?" "Nowhere in particular, just riding." "Nice bike. You gonna upgrade someday? Maybe a Harley, something like that?" "Nah, I'm good. Not really my thing." Just small talk, nothing unusual, but we got along surprisingly well. We spoke at length and discovered some common ground. As we were about to part ways, he said, Come back sometime. My house is around here. Stop in if you ever pass it through. Sure, I said. Why not? And that was that. Nothing weird, just a friendly local and a nice bit of countryside hospitality. So about a year later, I was out riding again and I realized I was back in the same area, and that old guy popped into my head. I didn't have his number or anything, and it wasn't pre-planned, but I figured I might try and find his place, drop in, surprise him. I had this dumb, hopeful image in my head of him shouting, "Hey, you really came back!" Like one of those heartfelt TV reunion shows. I don't know, I guess I'm kind of a lonely guy. Thing is, I didn't actually know where his house was. All I remembered that there was a vending machine, and him saying, "It's around here." So when I went back to that vending machine, I figured I'd ask someone. Eventually I flagged down this old farmer woman and asked if she knew a guy who matched the description. His name, how he looked, etc. "Ah, that's Mr. she said. "He lives up past the next mountain. Little higher up." She said it so casually, but let me tell you, when country folks say around here, they mean miles away. And always double check what nearby means in the mountains. So I rode over to the next mountain, but I still didn't know exactly where to go. I kept taking paths that seemed to head uphill, but they always narrowed or dead-ended, and there were no houses nearby. Just when I was about to give up, I spotted another old farmer by the side of the road, and I described the guy again. "Oh yeah, Mr. If you keep going straight, you'll see a narrow road that cuts diagonally. That'll take you to his place." Of course, that straight ahead was another few kilometers of winding gravel track. On the way there, I came across this small clearing, off to the side of the road, just a patch of sandy ground. I figured it was probably used for cars to pass each other on the narrow mountain road. Now back then, I had just gotten my off-road bike and I was feeling kind of cocky. There's this move called an XL turn. You keep one foot down, crank the throttle, and spin the rear tire to turn the bike in place. It's hard to do on asphalt, since the tires grip too much, so I've been practicing on loose surfaces whenever I could find them. So yeah, I saw the sand and thought, what a perfect place to practice, so I went for it. The problem is, XL turns require commitment, and if you hesitate, the tire doesn't slide, it grabs, and then the bike just tips, which it did. My hand was still on the throttle though, so the bike jerked weirdly, flew off, and landed in the nearby grass. And that's when I heard it. Crack. Not a mechanical sound, not metal on gravel, but something broke. I ran over to check and found my bike had landed on what looked like several nailed together wooden boards buried under the grass. They looked like they had once been a whole object, maybe a sign or a structure, but now it was shattered. I froze. I glanced around, but I was deep in the mountains, and no one was in sight. It was probably some old trespassing sign, I told myself, nothing important. But I was worried I'd just damaged somebody's property. But there wasn't much I could do about that. I picked up my bike and rode off quickly, heart pounding a little harder than I wanted to admit. The thing is, something about that break didn't sit right with me. It didn't feel like it had been just a sign. I felt like I'd broken something meant to stay hidden. I shook off that feeling and carried on. Soon after, I reached the narrow, diagonal path that the second farmer had mentioned. It led me to a quiet house tucked deep in the trees, rustic 2-story, completely alone. The old guy from last year greeted me with a huge grin, just like I imagined. "Hey, you really came back." I smiled, relieved. Maybe this would be a good memory after all. He invited me to stay the night, said it was too late to be heading back, and his wife was already preparing dinner. She greeted me warmly, laid out a full countryside spread, miso soup, simmered vegetables, grilled fish, and poured us all tea. For a guy living alone in the city, that kind of warmth gets to you. It was peaceful. Quiet, like I was part of their home. It was like for one night only I was part of the family. But one thing stood out to me. Their phone sure rang a lot during dinner. The wife would quietly excuse herself, step into the hall, and answer, each time she returned looking tenser. She would pass me and take the call in the hallway, so I could overhear snatches of the conversations. Yeah, he's staying tonight. No, he doesn't suspect anything. He said he's from the city. The old man poured sake, and his wife refilled my bowl again and again, with practiced grace. Their hospitality made me forget things, like being a stranger, like how deep in the mountains I was. But I couldn't ignore those phone calls, 3 in total during dinner, and they never spoke about the calls. Neither of them offered an explanation. I tried to make conversation. So, you two been living out here long? The old man nodded. Born and raised here, and we don't get many visitors. His wife said nothing, just cleared the dishes. I'm surprised you even remember me. He gave a chuckle that didn't quite reach his eyes, and said, huh, out here, we remember everything. It was a strange answer. Later, they showed me to my room on the 2nd floor. There was tatami mats, a futon, a low wooden dresser. It was simple, clean. A tiny paper lantern sat flickering in the corner. Bathroom's downstairs, just past the kitchen, the old man said. His wife stood behind him, arms folded in her apron. Sleep well, she said, and to me it sounded a bit more like a warning than a blessing. I lay in the futon fully clothed, phone tucked under the blanket, thumb hovering above the screen. No reception, of course, just a blinking red bar and 27% battery. I tried to sleep, but the silence was too loud. No crickets, no frogs, just the slow ticking of a wall clock in the hallway. And faintly, the sound of someone walking downstairs, back and forth, back and forth. Eventually, I must have dozed off. I don't know how long I was out there, but I woke up to a floorboard creaking right outside the door. Not a footstep, just the shift of weight, like someone standing there. I held my breath, eyes opened in the dark. Then the light from under the door dimmed. They were standing right there. I didn't move, I didn't breathe. Whoever it was just stood there for minutes. Then slowly the light returned, and their shadow was gone. But the silence had changed. It felt thicker, like a paused silence, as if someone was listening. At some point I fell asleep again, but my dreams were fragmented. Wooden boards cracking under wheels, the sound of distant ringing phones, someone standing at the foot of the futon, whispering, just out of hearing range. And when I opened my eyes again, it was all still pitch black. I checked my phone. 2:06 a.m. Battery at 16%. That's when I heard a voice, low, muffled, not quite a whisper. He's still here. It was coming from downstairs. Then another voice, sharper. We'll wait, just in case he tries. I bolted upright, cold sweat clinging to my back. Nope, no more waiting. I slid out of the futon and packed my things as quietly as possible. Shoes in hand, I had to try and get out of there, so I crept into the hallway. Every step on the old floor groaned like a death sentence. I had no clue where the owners of the house could be. It was a total gamble, but a gamble I had to take. I passed the stairwell, without looking down. At the front entrance, I grabbed my helmet and eased the door open. I was feeling relieved. I was actually outside. Outside, it was colder than I remembered. The night was moonless, still. I didn't breathe until I stepped off the wooden porch. But as I reached for the bike, I stopped cold. The tires sagged. Both were flat. The rubber looked cleanly slashed, like a knife had done it. I wanted to scream. Instead, I laughed. Quiet, desperate, hopeless. I didn't have time to think. I just started pushing the bike, dead tires flapping against the gravel. I was just trying to get as far away as I could from the house, before anyone noticed. Every few meters I stopped to listen. The night was unnaturally still. No dogs, no wind, just the quiet crunch of my own footsteps and the occasional wheeze of the handlebars. There wasn't a clear road, just a narrow dirt path leading downhill through the trees. I had no idea if it would lead to the main road or not, or a dead end or another house. After what felt like about 20 minutes, I let myself stop and breathe. And that's when I saw it. A light. Behind me. Not a flashlight, not headlights, just a warm yellow light from the direction of the house. Like someone had turned on the porch lamp. And I knew that hadn't been on when I left. They knew. I panicked, ducked off the path into the trees, dragging the bike with me until I couldn't anymore. It was useless now, dead weight. I left it propped against a fallen log and stumbled further into the forest. The branches tore at my sleeves. My socks were soaked from the dew. My breath came out in hot clouds that felt too loud. Like even the trees could hear me, and still no sound from behind, which was somehow worse. Were they following quietly? Did they see any point in chasing me? Did they already know where I was? This damn network. Everyone was watching me, everyone connected. Maybe there wasn't anywhere to run. I stopped by a cluster of trees, heart pounding so loud it hurt my ears, and I pulled my phone out, 11% battery. I dropped to the forest floor, and I curled up at the base of a thick tree and started typing this. Just in case. So if you're reading this, I messed up. About 20 years ago, I had a surreal experience that I can't fully explain. I've never had anyone in my life who really understood paranormal stuff, so I'm hoping by writing this down, someone out there might have an idea of what I actually encountered. Back in college, I was drifting through life. No goals, no dreams. I wasn't in any clubs, sports, or academic groups. I just kind of existed. The only thing that I ever really did was go on random drives with two friends, Ken and Satoshi, who were pretty much in the same boat as me. Eventually we got bored of just cruising around, and without anyone really suggesting it directly, we started exploring what we considered abandoned roads. Now, an abandoned road for us was just a road that had kind of fallen out of use, maybe because a new highway replaced it, or it was just sketchy looking. A side road that went nowhere. We weren't trying to go off-roading or anything crazy. We only explored places Ken's Suzuki Jimny could reasonably handle. And strangely, this new hobby actually stuck. Something about the otherworldly feel of forgotten places resonated with us. It gave our boring days a kind of eerie spark. One day Ken said, "I found a good one. You want to go check it out?" It was just after 2 p.m, and since none of us had any plans, Satoshi and I immediately said, "Yeah?" So we hopped into Ken's Jimny and headed out. The place was about 30 minutes away from campus, nestled off a winding road. From a busy main road, a narrow side path veered off at an angle. As soon as we reached onto it, we noticed weeds pushing up through the asphalt, loose stones and twigs scattered everywhere. It clearly hadn't been used in ages. But about 100 meters in, the path abruptly ended. "That's it?" Satoshi and I grumbled. Ken just smirked and pointed to the side. "Look at that." At first we thought the wall running along the road was just a standard landslide barrier, but partway along, it gave way to a chain link fence, and behind that fence the road continued. "I'm pretty sure we can get in." The fence was only held shut by thin wire. Ken came prepared with wire cutters and snipped it like it was nothing. We all climbed back into the Jimny and drove in. Honestly, it didn't really feel like we were doing anything wrong. We figured we'd only be able to go a short distance before fallen trees or debris blocked our way, but to our surprise, the road beyond the fence was in even better condition than the part before it. It was almost too clean. We kept going for 5 minutes along this narrow mountain path, then a brick arch appeared, like an old aqueduct tunnel, only 4 or 5 meters deep. It was wide enough for the chimney, so we drove straight through it. Once we emerged on the other side, the road started to degrade, stones scattered across the surface, and that's when Satoshi suddenly shouted, "Stop the car! Look behind us!" We turned to look, and that's when we saw it. A torii gate, just like the ones at shrines, was standing directly over the tunnel's exit, so tight against the arch you wouldn't see it until you were already under it, and the only way to get through the tunnel was to pass under the gate. That gave us all an uneasy feeling. We debated on turning back, but eventually agreed to press on, just a bit further. Hi, Jay here. In my experience, it's a bit of a taboo to walk directly under torii gates. I often see people walk to the left or the right of it while bowing their heads, to offer respect to the spirits that reside beyond the gate. I'm assuming this is the reason for that little debate and unease there. Anyway, back to the story. Another 500 meters down the road, the pavement ended. It transitioned cleanly into a dirt path, marked on both sides by 2 small shrine-like structures. The symmetry was unnatural. It looked less like an old road and more like a deliberately constructed boundary line. Instead of turning back, we felt compelled to continue. The dirt path was still wide and surprisingly clear. No fallen trees, no tire tracks either. Looking back, maybe we should have realized that something was off. The cleanliness, the silence. Then we reached an open area that took our breath away. The narrow forest path suddenly opened into a massive flat plain. There were no houses, no farmland, just empty fields as far as we could see. The sky was perfect, cloudless blue. It was stunning. But where were we? This area wasn't far from where we lived, and yet none of us knew that this place existed. It felt like stepping into a dream. Or somewhere we weren't supposed to be. And then, in the distance, we saw something dark. A building. As we drove closer, it became massive. It looked like a traditional thatched roof house, but huge, like gymnasium level huge. No windows, no outbuildings, just one enormous structure at the end of a road that existed solely to lead to it. We parked and stepped out. The air was clear, birdsong absent. It was silent, peacefully so, but unnaturally still. The temperature was perfect, like early spring. It almost made you want to stay forever. But that house, that ridiculously large, thatched structure, shattered the illusion. It was old, dark, made of wood, but not all falling apart. Was someone maintaining it, living here? "I'm gonna check it out," I said. Ken agreed. Satoshi hesitated, then said he'd walk around the outside. The front door was heavy but unlocked. We pushed it open. A musty, almost moldy smell hit us. We called out, "Hello? Anyone in here?" But got no response. Inside was a large wooden floor space with walls, a shelf or two completely empty, and a sliding door on one side. The ceiling stretched high above into the darkness, completely open all the way to the rafters. I'm trying my best not to leave anything out. We decided to open the sliding door. The room behind it was shockingly bright. Dozens of skylights lit up the space. It was huge, but what caught our attention were the 5 enormous pillars. Each one was a tree trunk, easily 3 meters in diameter, reaching up for more than 10 meters. Do trees this big even exist in Japan? Ken muttered. In the center pillar, we noticed dozens of talisman-like paper charms nailed to the wood. Not with normal nails, but long, crude iron spikes. The writing looked like kanji, but didn't make sense. Then Ken said, "There's something stuck under them." and we looked closer. They were ears. They really looked to me like human ears, hundreds of them nailed to the pillar, along with the charms. The ones near the bottom had decayed into unrecognizable shapes, but the ones up high, they looked fresh. We screamed. We ran. Out of the room, out of the building. We had to find Satoshi and get out. We ran around the massive building to the back. It took time just to get around it, and Satoshi was there, standing still, staring. We froze. Beyond the house, the flat land stretched on, and lined across the horizon were simple wooden altars, each spaced perfectly apart. On each altar, candles were lit, glowing unnaturally bright. They continued past the visible horizon, an endless flickering of fire. What the hell is this place? This is so bad, we need to go. Satoshi snapped out of it and walked towards us, pale. Then he said, "Hey, where's the sun gone?" And we looked up and the sky was blue and clear, but no sun. The light was even, with no source. The whole sky glowed with unnatural brightness. "Something's been off since we got here," Satoshi muttered, on the verge of tears. "It's too quiet. There's no birds, no bugs, and the road. There wasn't even a single blade of grass growing anywhere near." We grabbed him and ran to the car. On the way, I glanced back at the entrance of the house, and the front door was closed. I could have sworn we left that open. We didn't talk. We just got in the car, turned around, and drove. Ken got us back to the start of the abandoned road, and as we approached the main road, we finally saw it. There was the sun, sinking into the west. We were back. None of us ever experienced anything like a curse afterwards, no hauntings, no misfortune, but we all remembered it clearly, every second. A few days later, we passed the road's entrance again. The narrow road we'd driven down. It was now completely sealed off with a massive iron gate. Even if it wasn't, I would never go down that road again. I live in a mostly quiet area. It's really safe and a really peaceful little place. The buildings are really old and most of the residents are just as old. I think I must have been one of the youngest residents. As I was walking back to my apartment one night, I noticed something strange. There was a bright light coming from the apartment opposite mine. I stood there on the communal walkway, looking into that apartment to see if I could see anything, but I couldn't. There was nothing but darkness staring back at me. I had no help from the moon or the streetlight. They only obscured the view. Something was going on in that apartment. Someone seemed to be shining a light into my place. I couldn't figure out why someone would want to do that. Was this some kind of harassment, or was someone planning a burglary and checking if I was out? All these different thoughts were going around my head. The lights in the opposite apartment stayed off, and the torchlight continued to flick towards my place. I didn't like it. I was a single woman, living alone at the time, and I didn't want to think of someone trying to look in on my apartment. I had an idea. The torchlight seemed to be pointing towards the balcony outside of my bedroom window, so I figured if I hung something on the washing line that night, whoever was flashing the light wouldn't be able to see me. This seemed to work for me, and nothing much happened that night. I made sure all the doors and windows were locked. I must have triple-checked them. I didn't think of getting the police involved. To me, it could have been just some kids playing a game, but I didn't want their torchlight to keep me up all night. I did think about it quite a bit at work the next day. I guessed that there were strange people out in a place which appeared to be so quiet and peaceful. By the time I was home, I had concluded that it was just a part of life. My thoughts were interrupted when I saw an ambulance outside of my building. One of my neighbors, who was part of a small crowd that had gathered at the scene, told me that an old man in our neighborhood had passed away. It turned out that he was the owner of the house, with the torchlight flashing at my place across the way. I will never forget what the neighbor said next. It's a shame. Poor fella. It was his heart, you know. They say that he tried to save himself, get someone's attention. He was found with a flashlight torch in his hand. I guess that was all he could reach while he was on the ground. I felt an indescribable sense of guilt, and I still do. If only I hadn't been so paranoid. This happened a couple of years ago in Tokyo with two college friends. Mount Takao is a mountain located in Hachioji, Tokyo. It's a popular tourist destination. You can access it from the city center. There's a cable car which takes you up the mountain and you can get some awesome views of Tokyo. In the summertime there's a beer garden too. But this story happened on a cold December night in the off-season. The cable car wasn't active and there was no sign of people around. So we headed up the mountain trail with our breath fogging ahead of us and our torches in hand. There was no purpose in mind, no idea what we were doing. We had a few beers on board and we just wanted to go exploring. Looking back, it was all my fault. Because I said as we were passing by on the street below, "You know what, guys? I haven't even been up that mountain yet." To which my friend replied drunkenly, "Well, we'll change that tonight." I regretted bringing it up. The trail to the mountain was freezing cold. The muddy ground was hard with ice. Even though we had our beer jackets on and our actual jackets, we were still cold. The biting wind was relentless. After about an hour of climbing up the mountain, I had had enough. It was a stupid idea, so I said to my mates, "Guys, who wants to turn back?" I turned back to get a look at what reaction this would provoke, and I saw their red faces and runny noses, and I knew what they would say. "Yeah, we look like idiots," one said. "For sure," the other agreed. So we started heading back down the mountain, slipping as we went, laughing at our idiocy. We were in good spirits though, we were making memories. One of my mates slipped on his ass on the way down, and we broke out in raucous laughter. We stopped laughing in unison when we saw torchlights coming towards us. Apparently there were other idiots interested in climbing the mountain tonight. As we were getting close to the entrance to the mountain trail, it was narrow, and we were about to share an intimate moment with the owners of those flashlights. I noted 5 people in total. I counted their torches. They looked to be of different age ranges and genders based on their heights. As we got closer, I noticed that they were all wearing face masks as well. I guessed it was a family, but I couldn't sense any intimacy. They walked together, but in silence. I was about to say hello, but none of them seemed like they wanted to make eye contact. They passed us with their heads down. That's when I noticed something. All 5 of them had a large black plastic bag in hand. Weirdos, I thought as we passed. My friends seemed to share my opinion because they stopped and turned to watch them climb the mountain. We stood there in silence and watched them disappear into the dark shadow of Mount Takao. This encounter slipped my mind soon after. It was only a few days or maybe a week later when I was suddenly reminded of it. I received a link from one of my friends who was with me that night to an online news article. The news was a partially skeletonized corpse had been found on Mount Takao. I shuddered when I read the words. The corpse had been cut into 5 pieces. I called my friend and we spoke about the probability that we might have been on the mountain when that had happened. He remembered those people we passed and asked me if I thought they had anything to do with it. For a moment I didn't know what he was talking about, but then it came rushing back to me. Those 5 people, wearing those masks, going up in the middle of the night, in the off-season, holding a black plastic bag each, and the fact that they didn't want to give any of us eye contact. We spoke about it for a while, and we could only assume that we must have passed a family with something to hide. Hi, Jay here. Fun fact, As you're listening to this, I will probably be going up the very same mountain. I'll let you know if I find anything. It happened when I was in my second year of middle school. The old wooden clubhouse we had been using for years was scheduled to be torn down. It was the first day of summer break, and after our morning practice, we were assigned to clear everything out. Lockers, equipment, and supplies were hauled out over to the newly built clubhouse, leaving the old room empty and lifeless for the first time in years. That's when one of my friends called out, "Hey, check this out!" He was pointing at the wall where a row of lockers had been. Now that they were gone, we could see a wooden panel nailed to the wall. It looked out of place, different from the rest of the wall, almost like an afterthought. Curious, we knocked on it. The sound was hollow. "There's something behind there." We all knew that the school bathrooms were on the other side of this wall, so at first we assumed that it was just an old maintenance panel or a storage space, but the hollow echo had us all intrigued. We grabbed a metal pipe, then a pickaxe, prying and smashing at the wood until finally a section broke away. It wasn't the bathroom. Behind the panel was a narrow, pitch-black space about 3 meters deep and barely a meter wide. It had no floorboards, no windows, nothing but raw earth. The ground sloped down steeply, vanishing into the darkness. A damp, musty smell drifted up, mixed with something fouler. The stench of rot, sewage, and old mildew. Maybe because it was right next to the bathroom. But the air in there felt stale. Like it hadn't been disturbed in years. Without hesitation, the three of us climbed down into the space. I definitely wouldn't have done that these days, but back then when we were young, we were fearless, or maybe just dumb. Our shoes crunched against the loose dirt as we moved deeper in. The walls were rough, uneven, just packed dirt. As we reached the end of the sloping passage, we realized something. There was a hole in the ground. It was about 50 centimeters wide, just large enough for a person to crawl through. It looked unnatural. The shape was too perfect, like it had been dug out deliberately. I crouched down and peered inside, my breath echoing back at me from the darkness. It was impossible to see anything. I was about to say something when my friend nudged me. "Go get a flashlight." Excited, I scrambled back up, out of the hidden space, running across the schoolyard. I lied to a teacher about needing it for cleaning, and then snatched a flashlight from the supply room before dashing back. But when I got back to the hidden passage, my friends were gone. The air inside was heavy, and the dim light from the gap in the clubhouse barely reached down into that hollow space. I hesitated at the edge of the slope, trying to see into the darkness below. "Hey, where are you guys?" I called out. Silence. Then softly, from the blackness, "Bye-bye." A girl's voice, cold, clear, and far too close. My heart stopped. My skin erupted into goosebumps. I didn't think. I bolted out of there, nearly tripping as I scrambled back into the sunlight. My legs carried me towards the new clubhouse where a group of students had gathered. In the center of that group were my two friends. They were sitting on the ground, their faces pale, eyes wide. Their hands were scratched up, their knees covered in dirt. "What the hell happened?" I gasped. One of them, still shaken, spoke up. "After you left, I pulled out my keychain. You know, the one with the tiny red light? I used it to shine into the hole, just to see if there was anything there." He swallowed hard, gripping his arms. "And there was a face." "A face?" "A woman's face. Pale, smooth, no hair, no expression. Like a mannequin, but it wasn't a mannequin, man. It moved. I saw its hands, long, thin fingers pulling itself forward." The other friend nodded, his voice trembling. "And that's when we heard it." "Heard what?" "The laughing. From behind us." Oh, that made a chill run down my spine. We freaked out. We ran, slipped down the slope, scratched ourselves up. just got the hell out of there. I looked at them both, waiting for more, but that was it. They had nothing else to say. Neither of us ever saw anything again. No ghostly figures, no strange voices, nothing came for us in our sleep, like in the movies, and nothing followed us home. But the story doesn't end there. Later, when construction workers came to demolish the clubhouse, they found the hole behind the wall. Out of curiosity, they decided to dig deeper. What they found was an old underground chamber. Maybe it was an old air raid shelter. Maybe it was an animal den. But there was no record of it anywhere. No one knew who had dug it, or when, or why it had been sealed off. They covered it back up, filled it in, and now, the place is just an empty lot. But sometimes, someone still leaves flowers there, for reasons unknown to me. This story happened about 20 years ago, back in 2004, and to this day I still get chills thinking about it. At the time I was in my senior year of university, living at home in Mie Prefecture with my parents and my younger sister, who was in her second year at a junior college. We lived in a sizable 13th-floor apartment building. To give you a sense of the layout, imagine a long hallway that stretched from the front door to the living room. My room was the closest to the front door, followed by my sister's room, and then the bathroom further down the hall. That summer was a big one. It was the first Olympics of the 21st century, the Athens Games. I'm a huge baseball fan, so I was glued to the screen, watching every match that featured Team Japan. But because of the 6-hour time difference with Greece, a lot of the games were broadcast in the middle of the night. One night the big semi-final match between Japan and Australia was on, and of course I was up in my room, nervously cheering for Japan. Somewhere around 2 or 3 in the morning, I started to feel the call of nature, so I got up to head to the bathroom. After finishing up, I was about to go back to my room when, out of the corner of my eye, I noticed something odd. The front door was unlocked and slightly open. The door wasn't completely closed, if you get what I mean. It struck me as strange. We always kept it locked, especially at night. Shrugging it off, I clicked the lock shut and went back to my room. As the game drew closer to its intense final moments, I was so focused that I nearly jumped out of my skin when the intercom buzzed out of nowhere. It was well past midnight and we weren't expecting anyone. But then I remembered my sister was out with her friends. She often stayed out late back then, and it wouldn't be unusual for her to come home at around that time. I guessed it was her who didn't shut the door properly then. Assuming it was her, I ignored the intercom, figuring she had her key, and she would let herself in, and maybe learn a lesson about locking up. But a minute later the intercom buzzed again, then a third time. This game was really heating up, and I wasn't about to tear myself away from the screen over a few impatient rings. Besides, I thought surely someone else would get up. The intercom finally went silent, and I thought that would be the end of it. But then I heard the sound of someone jiggling the door handle, turning it over and over, as if trying to force their way inside. The sound was relentless, each twist of the handle growing louder and more frantic until it escalated into a series of loud bangs against the door. Annoyed and a bit unnerved, I gave in. Fine, I thought. I'll open the door, but she's getting an earful about this. With a sigh, I got up and went to the door and I unlocked it. I started to turn back towards my room, eager to not miss any more of the game than I had to, assuming she'd just walk in. But as I turned, I heard the front door open behind me. I was about to mutter something about her late-night noise, but when I glanced over my shoulder, my words froze in my chest. Standing in the doorway wasn't my sister. It was a man. A total stranger. He was dressed in slacks but shirtless, his hair disheveled, and his face slightly flushed. as if he had been drinking. I couldn't move. I just stood there staring at him, trying to process what I was seeing. He looked back at me with an expression that shifted from confusion to realization, his eyes darting around as if he had made a terrible mistake, and then he stammered, "Oh, sorry, I thought..." Then, almost comically, he looked down at the newspaper sticking out of our mail slot, pulled it out and mumbled, "Morning paper delivery." And then he handed it to me. I reached out without thinking, muttering a faint, "Thank you," as my mind reeled. We stood there in awkward silence for a few moments, neither of us sure what to do. Then, with a sheepish nod, the man quickly turned and walked away, disappearing down the hallway. When I finally shut the door, I felt a shiver run through me. I had been so focused on the game, so sure that it was my sister at the door, that I'd never even considered the possibility of it being someone else. What if he hadn't been so harmless? What if he had a weapon? I couldn't stop imagining how easily the situation could have taken a darker turn. Later I reasoned that the man was probably drunk and mistaken our apartment for his own. Maybe he'd forgotten his key and resorted to banging on the door, hoping that someone would wake up and let him in. But the thought haunted me for days. I kept wondering, what if I hadn't noticed the door was unlocked earlier? What if he hadn't been just a confused, tipsy guy? What if he did have something on his mind and he didn't expect to see someone awake that late at night, and he knew the door was unlocked? Even now, 2 decades later, that night plays back in my mind from time to time, always making me double-check my door before I go to bed. Oh, and in case you're wondering, Team Japan lost to Australia that night. It was a rough night all round. This story takes place when I was working as a temp at a factory in Kyoto Prefecture. It was a massive factory owned by a globally known company, and it sprawled across a large area with several interconnected buildings. But despite its impressive scale, the atmosphere felt hollow. By the time I arrived, there had been waves of layoffs due to economic downturns and efficiency measures. The floors, once bustling with hundreds of workers, now felt desolate, with only a fraction of the original employees left. The hallways were silent, except for the faint hum of machines, and the empty workstations gave the building an eerie stillness, almost as if it was a ghost of its former self. The factory had 4 floors. I was assigned to the 3rd, where my team and I worked on various parts for the assembly line. The 4th floor, as I learned, used to be dedicated to manufacturing as well. But now it was just storage, stacked with crates and forgotten equipment, tools, and random items of stock. Most of the workers didn't have any reason to go up there. I was told that only a skeleton crew ever ventured to that floor to take inventory or retrieve supplies. One day, out of nowhere, in the smoking area, a senior employee wandered over to me, one of the few who had been there since the factory's heyday, and he asked me, with a sly grin on his face, "Have you ever used the bathroom on the 4th floor?" The question took me more than a little by surprise. "No, I haven't," I replied. He gave me a strange look and then he leaned in closer, his voice low and serious. "Don't. That bathroom. They say it's haunted. Stay away if you can." I stared at him, trying to gauge whether he was joking or not, but his expression was dead serious. My curiosity got the better of me, so I pressed him to explain. He sighed and began to tell me the story. During the last round of major layoffs, it was brutal. People who'd worked here for decades were let go of without warning. Some of them couldn't handle it. One of the men who was laid off, well, he took it pretty hard. The story goes he went up to the 4th floor bathroom and Yeah, he ended things on his own terms, if you get me. They found him hanging in one of the stalls. Ever since then, people have said that they see him there sometimes. The way he said it so calm and matter-of-fact gave me a chill. I'd never really believed in ghosts, and I figured he was just trying to scare me. But the seriousness in his eyes made me uneasy. I tried to laugh it off. It was a natural knee-jerk reaction, chalking it up to another factory legend meant to spook out the new hires. Some kind of hazing or something like that, you know. Time went on, and I forgot about his warning. The factory operated on a 2-shift system, and every few weeks I'd switch from the day shift to the night shift. With the fiscal year end approaching, that we were tasked with inventory duties. Production had paused and we were split into small teams to organize and count supplies in the storage areas. As it happened, I was assigned to work on the 4th floor that night. The silence of the building felt heavier after dark. Every footstep echoed as if the walls themselves were amplifying the sounds, and every shadow seemed to stretch further than usual. We worked in groups, and it was comforting to hear the occasional chatter from the other teams. But after a couple of hours, I found myself needing to use the bathroom. I was about to head down to the 3rd floor restroom, but then I remembered the one nearby, on the 4th floor. It was late, and I didn't want to waste time trekking down and back up. I was getting tired. Before I left, I told the senior employee, the same one who had warned me before, where I was heading. His face darkened and said, "You're really going to use the 4th floor bathroom?" I gave a nonchalant shrug. Yeah, it's closer. I tried not to look scared. He looked at me, like he wanted to say something, but finally just nodded and said, "All right, but be careful." With his words in the back of my mind, I made my way through the long, quiet hallway. Outside the bathroom door, I noticed one of those curved mirrors mounted high on the wall, the kind they use to help people avoid collisions around corners. I glanced at my reflection as I approached, but just as I turned my eyes back to the door, I heard it. The unmistakable sound of a toilet flushing. I froze. Who else would be here at this hour? My heart began to beat faster, but I quickly remembered the senior employee's story and the fact that our bathrooms were equipped with automatic flush systems. It's just a random flush, I told myself. Nothing to worry about. I took a deep breath and I pushed open the door. The bathroom was dimly lit, casting odd shadows along the tiled walls. As I walked in, I felt a strange prickling sensation on the back of my neck, like I was being watched. But I shook off the feeling and made my way over to the sink. Then I heard it. A faint trickle. My eyes were drawn to the faucet at the sink next to mine. Water was dripping steadily, each drop echoing louder than it should have. The faucet was one of those sensor types designed to stop automatically, but there was no reason for it to be dripping like that. I tried to rationalize it and thought of it as nothing more than maybe a malfunction. But I realized something. The bathroom felt colder, the air thickening with a sense of foreboding. Trying to ignore it, I hurried to finish. But as I straightened up and looked into the mirror, my breath got caught in my throat. Behind me, reflected in the mirror, was the silhouette of a man in a factory uniform. His face was pale, his eyes dull. He wore a blank, emotionless expression. He stood so close behind me that I could almost feel him. My blood turned to ice. I spun around, heart pounding, but there was no one there. I felt sick with dread. but I forced myself to turn back to the mirror, hoping that maybe I'd imagined it or seen something that looked vaguely human shape, that tricked my brain, but there was nothing. Nothing now, just my own pale, frightened face staring back at me. My hands shook as I tried to compose myself. I left the bathroom as quickly as I could, feeling a prickling sensation along my skin as if unseen eyes were boring into my back. Just as I reached the hallway, I caught sight of something in that curved mirror outside the bathroom door, and my stomach dropped. In the mirror, I could see him. The man in the uniform. He was standing just inside the doorway, looking at me. His face was blank, but his eyes, they were fixed right on me. I stumbled back, my heart racing, nearly tripping over my own feet. When I finally turned around to look with my own eyes, he was gone. Shaking, I bolted back to the work area, and every step felt like he was right behind me. I didn't look back, I couldn't bear to. After that, I couldn't shake the feeling that I wasn't alone, even during my shifts. Sometimes I'd feel a presence just out of sight, a weight pressing down on me. Especially whenever I went near the 4th floor. The factory felt haunted by more than just his spirit. Every empty hallway, every shadow seemed to pulse with memory, as if this building remembered his despair. A few weeks later, I quit. I couldn't take the constant feeling that something or someone was watching, waiting. Even now, when I'm far from that place, I still find myself glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see him standing there. I'll never forget those eyes, those dull and accusing eyes. Feels like he could follow me forever. No, you don't forget seeing something like that, let me tell you. Long ago, back in the 20s, parts of a village were used as a garbage dump. What I mean by that is people would just dig holes and throw their trash in there. This would be the usual kind of household waste. This kind of dumping ground was called a hake. I'm not sure if it's the same in different regions, but that's the word I know it as. So let's go back to the future. One of my hobbies is to search for antiques and retro pieces. I guess it's kind of like metal detecting or mudlarking. Once I had learned about the hake, the 1920s dumping ground, I had to go see for myself if I could find anything. I was particularly interested in retro and vintage bottles and glassware. I would search for plots of land where villages and settlements used to stand. They are surprisingly common over here. Once I found an interesting place to explore, I would make contact with the current owner of the land or the town hall and ask for permission to come and search for the ancient relics. Some of these former village sites were very difficult to get to. I'm often driving down narrow, winding, one-way lanes. There's a lot of walking involved too. On the day my experience took place, I had been struggling to find the site. It was the most remote former village that I had ever discovered. I had been walking and climbing for most of the day, and the sun was beginning to go down. I really didn't want to quit without finding the place though. Before long, it got really dark out. It was darker than it seemed because the setting sun was hidden by the trees of the mountainous woods. I was heading into a dense and dark forest. Eventually I found my location. I first saw some dilapidated houses. I was amazed to see that they were still standing in areas. I thought that the village was abandoned, so I had no worries about looking over the place. There was no sign of life there. I felt pretty safe despite the darkness. It was really interesting to walk through that abandoned and overgrown village. The crumbling buildings had been gripped by vines and weeds in their struggle for sunlight. I had to watch my step because the floor was littered with broken bricks and dead tree branches. I came to an area which I thought would be the hake. I searched without digging too much for any items which weren't potentially buried deep. I used a rake tool for this rather than a shovel. Before long, I heard the satisfying clink of the rake against glass. I found a bottle. These vintage bottles can sell for a high price if you find the right buyer, so I had to be careful not to break it. However, what I found wasn't going to sell at all. I found an old pesticide bottle, and what was probably an old juice or milk bottle. There was nothing really worth taking home with me. Next, I found some kind of glass Coca-Cola looking bottle, and I think an eye drop bottle. But then I found something that I knew would fetch a good price. It was some kind of beautiful pottery piece. I carefully dug it out, gently scraped away the dirt, and then took a look inside. What I saw inside that pot was something that made me drop it, look to the heavens, and decide to quit and leave that village. In the pot were several severed fingers, which had rotten with age. I could see mummy-like skin clinging to the ivory white bones. They were just in there like it was some sort of collectible trinket or something. I made my mind up right then and there to get the hell out of there and never return. It happened about 3 years ago. At the time, I was in my final year of university, with graduation looming ahead. My days were consumed with job hunting and working on my thesis. Non-stop pressure and stress. By the time summer break came around, I decided I need a change of pace. I packed up and headed out alone for a road trip across the Tohoku region. Traveling by car meant that I had complete freedom. No strict plans, just driving wherever I felt like, stopping when I saw something interesting, or pulling over to take a nap if I got tired. It was supposed to be an easygoing, soul-cleansing kind of trip. The first day, I drove straight north through Tohoku and ended up sleeping in a parking lot of a convenience store along a national highway in Aomori. The next day, I wandered into town. I saw the Nebuta floats, large, brightly illuminated lantern floats. Strolled across the shopping arcade, picked up some souvenirs, that sort of thing. But it was the second night when things changed. I had crossed into Akita Prefecture, driving along a rural highway. It was already pitch dark outside, and the digital clock on my dashboard showed just after 10 p.m. The radio started crackling with static, thick, distorted, almost like something was breathing through it. I shut it off and checked the GPS instead, hoping to get my bearings. But of course, I didn't recognize a single place name on the screen. Where the hell am I? I mumbled, uneasy but trying to stay calm. I kept following the national route, heading south, using the blue road signs and GPS as my guide. Then I noticed a narrow mountain road veering off to the left. It was ridiculously thin and snaked up into forested hills. I don't know why, but something made me want to check it out. Maybe it was the curiosity of being somewhere unknown, or something deeper. Even though I felt a vague sense of unease, I turned the wheel and entered the path. Almost immediately, the asphalt gave way to gravel. The tires crunched loudly in the silence. Other than the beam of my headlights, there was no light anywhere. Not a glimmer from the sky, not a distant house or a street lamp. I told myself I'd just go far enough to look for a spot to turn around. I didn't want to mess up my tires, so I crept forward, looking for a patch of open ground. That's when I saw it. A small rotting shack just up ahead, barely illuminated by my headlights. It wasn't a house, it was more like an abandoned storage shed that had been forgotten for years. The wooden walls were splintered and peeling, half collapsed in places, and the whole thing looked like it could cave in at any moment. From the outside it looked maybe 6 or 7 tatami mats in size, tiny. But the moment I saw it, I felt it in my gut. Something was wrong. Very wrong. It was the kind of structure that radiated unease, like it had absorbed every terrible thing that had ever happened inside. It was just the kind of vibe it gave off. Thankfully, there was just enough space on the edge of the road to do a 3-point turn. I eased the car back carefully, trying not to let my imagination get the best of me. And then, I heard something, a sudden unnatural sound, which came from the direction of the shack. It was like chunks of wood slamming against each other, not in a rhythm, but in chaotic collisions. A chill shot straight down my spine. At first I thought maybe something had toppled over naturally. Maybe an old plank leaning against a wall had fallen. But no, this wasn't accidental. It sounded too deliberate. Like something was moving around inside, bumping into things, disturbing the interior. I looked down and there was nothing but darkness and trees. No wind, no animals, just the shack, standing there like it was waiting for me. My hands moved faster now, trying to complete the U-turn. I was sweating. My pulse was hammering. Then, without meaning to, my eyes drifted towards the shack again. And that's when I saw something black. It was coming out of the shack. It crawled, or maybe crept, just barely stepping out of the ruined doorway. Its entire body was covered in a long, matted, jet black fur. It wasn't a bear, it wasn't a dog. It looked vaguely human in shape, like one of those old illustrations of a Yamabito, a mountain man from folklore, or maybe a yeti, or Hibagon, Japan's own rumored cryptid, the anthropoid ape anomaly. But this thing was small, child-sized, maybe the height of an elementary school kid. Its face was obscured, covered in hair. I couldn't see eyes, nose, or a mouth. Still, my gut told me everything I needed to know. That thing was dangerous. Not in the way a wild animal is dangerous, but in a way that said if it so much noticed me, something would break inside me, something I wouldn't be able to fix. My entire body locked up, trembling so hard it felt like my bones were vibrating. And then the tears started, just pouring down my face like a flood. It didn't speak, it didn't make a sound, it just stood there. But the presence it gave off wasn't just malice, it was far beyond that, like it exuded something warped and cursed. As if it didn't belong to our world. I had to get out. I threw the car into gear and I gunned it. I don't remember anything after that. The next thing I knew, I was pulling into a self-service gas station in the neighboring prefecture. After that, I didn't stop again. I just drove and drove straight home without pause. When I got back and parked, I popped the trunk out of habit, just to make sure everything was where it should be. What I found in there made my blood freeze all over again. Scattered across the inside of the trunk were tiny dead winged insects. Dozens of them. And the car wash bucket I kept back there. There was a pool of thick, dirty, dark brown water. Filthy, like a runoff from a swamp. A few insects were still buzzing lazily over it, alive. But I hadn't been anywhere near water, not even close. And I hadn't opened the trunk once since I left for the trip. After that night, everything fell apart. At university, in the cafeteria, the soup looked like that brown water, and I couldn't bring myself to eat it. In lectures, I'd glance over and see my friends' arms crawling with winged insects, like a living coat. I had to take a break from my thesis. I started seeing a psychiatrist, got put on meds. Eventually I stabilized. The bugs in the brown water stopped appearing, but that black figure from the shack, that image still clings to my mind. Vivid as ever. What the hell was that thing? Was it just some freak accident? Or was it connected to the time about a month earlier when I visited a notoriously haunted location in the Tohoku region? Nothing happened back then, or so I thought. Either way, I swore to myself I'd never take a narrow mountain road again. And if you go somewhere for a test of courage, please be careful, because you never know what's waiting in the dark. Hi, Jay here. The creature described could be related to Yamabiko, as mentioned, echoing spirits. Yamabito, wild men of the mountains, or even an obscure form of Tsuchigumo, earth spiders that are said to live deep in remote forests. The odd size, human-like shape, and the overwhelming sense of spiritual pollution suggests something far beyond animal. Perhaps a forgotten yokai, guarding an abandoned shrine or cursed trail. Warning: this experience might not be appropriate for some viewers. Discretion is advised, as this one is pretty close to the bone. This happened when I was a newlywed. My husband and I went to visit his mother in his rural family home in Kyushu. He said that he was from a small town, but it was smaller than I ever imagined. Another reason we headed back to his hometown was because his father was in the hospital. My sister-in-law was a student, so she wasn't home to help, so that left his mother essentially home alone. And she didn't have a driver's license, so it made getting around the countryside very difficult. She could walk most places, and of course there were buses and taxis, but occasionally you just need a car, don't you? She needed a bunch of gardening supplies. We arrived in Kyushu on the Shinkansen. My husband would drive his mum around in his father's car. I was planning on going with them, but I suffer with anemia, and I almost collapsed on the train. When my mother-in-law saw me, she said that I looked pale, and she told me it would be better off if I stayed home. I didn't really mind that idea. My husband's room had been left the way it was since he graduated from high school. Same bed, same desk, etc. I got into bed and I shut my eyes. Now I should say that I'm a deep sleeper. I experienced and slept through the Great Hanshin earthquake, and I came out unscathed. Also, I have somehow slept through a 5.0 earthquake too. I had no idea it happened. I just turned on the TV in the evening and saw the news and I was like, whoa, did that happen? It was truly shocking. So there I was sleeping soundly on my husband's childhood bed for a while, I guess, before I began to feel slightly restless. I put it down to being asleep someplace different. You know, like when you miss the comforts of home, or you wake up in the middle of the night at a friend's place and you're confused and that initial thought is, where am I? It was a bit like that. I wasn't used to sleeping alone, so when I thought I sensed movement on the bed, I immediately thought that, my husband's back earlier than expected. I dreamily thought that he saw me sleeping, and he felt like joining me for a while. After a few moments, I felt like something was off. He was a little more ambitious, shall we say, with what he thought he could get away with at his parents' home. I was more than half awake at that point, and I knew something was wrong. I felt something moving beneath the covers, beneath my skirt. I felt a hand try to part my legs, and breath on my bare thighs. I opened my eyes, threw off the covers, and I saw that there was an old man on the bed. I couldn't believe what I was seeing. He saw that I was awake and immediately tried to overpower me. I want to see what a city bitch's pussy looks like. That's what this guy said as he tried to grab at my clothing. At first I was speechless. I was in this stunned state. I couldn't believe it was happening. I couldn't scream right away, but then my brain kicked into gear. I leaned over to the bedside table, grabbed my phone, and dialed the number for the cops. I kicked at that old man with all my might, and he went toppling backwards off of the bed. I took my chance as I ran downstairs as fast as I could. I heard the old man cussing me, and saying something else disgusting up there as he got to his feet. I bolted out of the front door and I ran across the street, where I was immediately spotted by another old guy who was washing his car. I was screaming, it was all horrible. I screamed at the old man for help, and then I just began to cry. The wife of the guy who was washing his car came out and ushered me into their home to take refuge, while I waited for the police to arrive. While I was explaining the situation, my husband and mother-in-law returned home. As I was telling the police everything through tear-filled eyes and heavy sobs, the old man, the guy who got into bed with me at my mother-in-law's house, he came out of the house and just sauntered off down the street as if nothing happened. That didn't work out too well for him because he was instantly arrested. Now that my husband and his mother were back, they were able to tell me a few things about the old man, and it turned out he just lived up the street on the opposite side. He was living with his two 40-something-year-old sons who didn't work. He didn't work either. Apparently he had a young wife, but she doesn't live with him anymore. Wonder why, huh? It turned out that he was jealous of my husband and the life he had with me outside of the small town. He told the police that because I was from the city and wearing different clothing, I was, quote, glamorous, and I looked easy to him. He told the police that when he broke in, he had committed no crime. He was simply trying to ascertain if I was a hooker or not. Naturally, he was taken away in a police car, and we were planning on staying the night, but I didn't want to after that. I don't think I was being difficult by wanting to go home. Before leaving, my husband and his mother informed me that the old man was very important. He was a very important person in their town. I didn't care. What that man tried to do would have been irreversible. I was fully prepared to sue this man, but I was asked multiple times to find a more amicable resolution. They kept telling me that they wanted a peaceful end to the matter. I was aghast. It wasn't as simple as that. I couldn't believe it. I couldn't get them to see that. In the end, there was no apology, no settlement, and no punishment for the old man. And I cried myself to sleep that night. Is this just something that happens in small towns? God, I hope not. This is a true story from when I was a university student. I've made a few personal interpretations where things don't make sense, so if you notice something that feels off, I'd actually appreciate it if you point it out. I'm still trying to put the pieces together. You'll see. During summer breaks, I used to travel a lot. Not like backpacking across foreign countries for spiritual enlightenment or anything like that. More like hopping on random local trains and getting off at places I've never heard of. Grabbing some soba, soaking in a hot spring, buying a souvenir or two, then heading home. This was around the end of the 20th century, when the internet had only just started becoming a thing. Pagers were still considered to be high-tech gear, and smartphones didn't exist. You couldn't just look up stuff about where you were going. Most of the time I had zero plans. If I managed to find a net cafe to sleep in, then that was a good night. More often than not, I just crashed at stations and slept rough. Anyway, on one summer day, I was riding the last train on a local line somewhere in the Kanto region, and I got off one stop before the final destination. I was the only one who got off. Why? Simple, I liked the name of the station. That's literally it. Sure, the next stop was more well-known and probably had more going on, but I was already prepared to sleep at the station that night, so it didn't really matter. In hindsight, this was a bad idea because this was the decision that kicked off one of the most terrifying nights of my life. The place was a remote, unmanned station in the middle of nowhere, but the building itself was surprisingly decent. Spending the night there didn't seem like it would be much of an issue. No houses anywhere nearby, no shops obviously, but there were vending machines and a fairly clean toilet. And to my surprise, I saw a wooden sign not far from the station. It advertised an open-air bath within walking distance. I'd already bathed earlier that evening near another station, but I had no reason not to go again. So I followed a narrow mountain trail that led away from the edge of what used to be a hot spring town. Eventually I found it, a tiny bathhouse tucked away in a grove of trees, just a small tub with a roof over it. I tossed some coins into the payment box and turned on my mini lantern and slipped into the warm water. The night air was quiet, and I was soaking there peacefully, until the wind suddenly turned cold. No, it wasn't a ghost or anything like that, just a chill in the air that makes you go, ah crap, it's gonna rain. Sure enough, I got dressed quickly and started heading back down towards the station, and by the time I arrived, the first few drops had turned into a downpour. Talk about perfect timing. I even gave myself a little pat on the back for moving so quickly. Feeling pretty smug, I sat myself down on a bench inside the station, and I stretched out. It was dark inside, but light from the platform seeped in past the ticket gates, enough for me to see what I was doing. I pulled out my sleeping bag and crawled into it. I set my mini alarm clock to go off an hour before the first train. and just as I started to drift off, I noticed it. Something felt off. There was a strange smell. Not mine. Like an animal, musky. My eyes adjusted to the darkness, and then I saw him. In the far corner of the station house, a man was sitting with his knees hugged against his chest. My heart leapt into my throat. I clenched my jaw and tried to force the panic back down. Outside, the rain pounded on the roof. Thunder rumbled in the distance, and this guy, he must have been sitting there the whole time, right? I'd made quite a bit of noise setting my stuff up, and he just sat there watching me, saying nothing. I stared at him. My pulse was racing. He was curled up in sort of a crouch, face buried against his knees, so I couldn't see his expression. He wore chinos and a collared shirt. Looked way more presentable than me. His hair was a bit messy, and he had a broad frame. But he didn't move. Not a twitch. Not even the sound of breathing. I hadn't been looking at him for more than a minute. But I was already starting to think, wait, is he dead? Hey, I called out, my voice barely above a whisper. No response. I clapped my hands together. Loud, sharp, echoing. In the empty station. Nothing. Alright, time to take this test properly then. I grabbed the mini alarm clock I'd just set and changed the time to the current time. The alarm rang out. It was so loud. But still nothing. Right, that's it. He's dead. When I arrived, the lights in the station were on, and he definitely wasn't there. So he must have arrived and potentially died while I was at the bathhouse. But how? Was this an accident or a crime? I remembered there was a payphone outside the station. I figured I should probably call the police. But what if he was just asleep? I mean, unlikely, but still. I stomped my feet loudly as I approached him, got right up close, and leaned in to take a look at his face. Shouldn't have done that. Blood was dribbling from his mouth like drool. Okay, maybe he might still be alive. I touched his arm. It was cold, stiff. Rigor mortis appeared to have already set in. Yeah, he was definitely dead. I turned towards the door to head outside, hand on the handle, and then it hit me. If I call the cops, I'll be the one who found him, right? They'll question me, maybe even suspect me, and that sounded like a huge pain in the ass. I hesitated. I sat back down on the bench. I started packing up all my stuff, sleeping bag, alarm clock, everything. I tried to reconstruct my alibi from the moment I stepped off the train until now. I hadn't seen anyone except him. Though technically he saw me first. Still, maybe it was an accident. Maybe he just came in to get out of the rain, sat down and died. I mean, that's plausible, right? I turned my lantern back on and went to approach him again. Then I saw marks on his neck, like something had been wrapped around it. It wasn't natural. This was murder. I didn't want any part of this. I told myself, if I could think of a good way to prove my innocence, then I'd call the police. But right then my brain was spinning. I wasn't thinking straight. If I got caught up in this, I'd miss work, and honestly, that was the bigger concern in my mind at the time. As I spiraled in thought, a little dark voice inside me whispered, "Just leave." This guy had nothing to do with me. I didn't know him. I wasn't involved. I was innocent. That sounded really appealing. I decided I'd walk to the next train station, the one I was originally heading towards, and I'd get there by the morning. But just as I put my hand on the door again, thunder cracked. Alright, the rain. I sat back down. Maybe I should just wait out the night. If it clears by dawn, I'll slip away quietly. But then, the smell started to fill the room. The man's smell. That sickly, unmistakable scent of death. I couldn't take it anymore, so I decided to sit on the bench out on the platform instead. As I crossed through the gate, I spotted a small waiting room across the tracks. Perfect. I climbed the stairs to the opposite platform. The lights inside were off, but the bench had cushions, and it was more comfortable than I expected. If not for the dead guy, this would have been a great spot to sleep. and at some point I must have nodded off. I slept surprisingly well. When I woke up, the sky was still dark, but it had that early dawn feel, and the rain had stopped. Stars glittered overhead, something you never really see in the sea. Panicking a little, I headed back across the bridge towards the main station. Just get out without looking at the body, I told myself. I passed through the gate, and I couldn't resist looking in the direction I saw him in last, but he was gone. I froze. My body instinctively dropped into some kind of martial arts stance, like a praying mantis. Did he get up? Was he alive this whole time? Total panic. No idea what to do. I screamed. And then I started singing. I don't know why, but it was something random and something stupid. I don't even remember what song it was. When I finally stopped, I slumped onto the bench again. My breathing slowed. My mind began to clear. I went over to where he had been sitting. There was a stain there. Maybe blood, maybe drool, maybe something else. It was dark. I couldn't say for sure. And then I noticed a smell that hadn't registered the night before. Cigarette smoke. Fresh, not old and stale. Fresh. I checked the ashtray. Murky water and a bunch of soggy butts. It was hard to tell anything from that. I sat down again, trying to make sense of it. Maybe the man was alive. Maybe he woke up, smoked a cigarette, and left. That'd be the best case scenario, but no. I'm pretty sure he was dead. I touched him. He was ice cold and stiff. So, then what happened? Someone must have put his body there. Then when I was asleep in the other waiting room, they came back and took it? And that someone had been smoking? Well, that theory scared the hell out of me. If I'd just stayed in the station building, I would have run into him. A murderer? Yakuza? Some kind of crazy drifter? Foreign mafia? Who knows who the culprit might have been? If I'd have tried walking to the next station, maybe they would have followed me. Maybe I was safer here without even realizing it. Somehow, by total accident, I had chosen the safest possible place to hide. I waited until the first train arrived. About half an hour before it came, an old lady shuffled into the station. I don't think I'd ever been so relieved to see another person in my life. I never reported what happened. I didn't even know how to explain it. Back home, I searched Yahoo News every day for weeks, but nothing came up. No reports, no missing persons, nothing. Over 10 years have now passed since then, and the memory has faded a bit, but sometimes when I'm camping or sleeping outdoors, it comes back. Sometimes I dream about it. A thunderous night at the rural station. Me sleeping. The man reappearing in the waiting room. Me screaming and running away. Sometimes I think, if I'd reported it right away, the police might have caught something on the cameras. It could have been solved, but I don't know. Maybe it was my imagination. Maybe it was all a dream. Let's go with that. Yeah? This is a local incident from the neighboring town, but there was a public phone in front of a certain station that was scheduled for removal. But the phone inside had already been swiftly collected by the telephone company, leaving only the empty booth behind. The booth remained in that state for a while, eventually becoming a playground for children concerned about safety. Authorities sealed the booth off. They enclosed it with a metal chain-link fence, one of those pop-up ones you can get. It made it impossible for anyone to enter, basically. About half a year passed like this. One night when someone arrived at the station, they noticed about 4 or 5 people gathered around the booth, loudly discussing something. Curious, they approached the scene and discovered a blonde foreign man inside the booth. Despite it being completely sealed, he was yelling frantically, demanding someone call the police. I say a foreign man because he was clearly not a Japanese native, and it wasn't clear what nationality he was from first glance. Almost immediately after, the police arrived alongside 2 suspicious-looking vehicles, a black painted sports car and a pure white Mercedes-Benz, likely belonging to the Public Security Bureau. The foreign man was quickly whisked away in the Mercedes without any fuss. Later, when the police investigated his nationality, they discovered that the country he claimed to be from did not exist. 2 days later, after the incident, the phone booth was finally removed. Strangely enough, on the stand where the phone once rested, several green walnut shells were reportedly found, the outer husk of unripe walnuts. I learned later that these shells are linked to magical properties and folk beliefs in some cultures. Hi, Jay here. This creepy story reminded me of the baffling urban legend involving a mysterious traveler from Taured. The tale goes back to a hot day in July 1954 at Tokyo's Haneda Airport. Officials became perplexed when a traveler presented a passport from Taured. He attempted to enter Japan, and his passport seemed legitimate, covered in authentic-looking stamps, and the traveler himself insisted adamantly that Taured was a real European nation, though it couldn't be found on any map. Airport security, bewildered and concerned about potential fraud or espionage, detained him in a guarded hotel room overnight while they conducted further checks. Strangely enough, by morning the traveler had inexplicably vanished without a trace. Despite the room being continuously monitored and secured, all his belongings, including his passport from Taured, had vanished as mysteriously as their owner. No explanation was found for this man's sudden appearance and disappearance, and the incident remains an enigmatic footnote in the annals of unsolved mysteries. Could it be that, like the man from Taured, the foreigner in the sealed-off phone booth slipped through some invisible crack in worlds, or perhaps these strange incidents suggest reality is not quite as firm and reliable as we'd like to believe? What if there are countless unknown doors scattered throughout our seemingly ordinary surroundings, just waiting to open unexpectedly? It's something to think about for sure. Back when I was a student at college, I used to work part-time. I picked up a night shift at a local bar, and I really enjoyed working there. On the night that this took place, an older gentleman was already drinking in the bar when I came in to start my night shift. As soon as he saw me, stood behind the counter, he got up from his seat and came over to the bar with a smile on his face. When he approached the bar, he struck up a conversation with me. I knew him. He was a regular. A very quiet regular, but a very nice one. We had spoken before, and he was alright in my books. Now, I have to say that the content from here on in is incoherent. If you don't understand what the guy said, then you'll be feeling the same as I did at the time. The old man approached and said the following: "From now on, it's China's time. You'll see to whatever's left, won't you?" He reached out his hands, both of them, and I in return offered my hands out to him. We joined hands in a strange kind of double handshake. He was smiling so much it was hard to refuse. To be honest, I really don't like hand touching. I don't know why, but it makes me feel all clammy. I let him though because he seemed to be enjoying himself, and that's what my manager always says. He would say, "If they go home smiling, then you've done your job." The old man had a big smile on his face, and it looked like he had probably bought a couple of drinks, so for the sake of my job, I endured it. He had a nice smile. It was serene. I smiled along, and just thought to myself, "Oh great, this guy's drunk." I glanced over at the table he had come from and noticed something. He had a beer there, and some kind of side snack dish. That wasn't unusual, to be honest. What was slightly unusual was the fact that they looked untouched. I guessed that he wasn't that hungry. To be honest, I couldn't care less because I was just starting my shift. Shortly after we spoke, the old man headed out the door, and I thought nothing more of it. In the early hours of the morning, my manager at the bar received a call. The police were calling. There was a body, and there were questions. The old man had been found dead. The old man had been found lying in the street near an intersection just up from our bar. Apparently, he was found quite quickly and taken to the hospital. Unfortunately, there wasn't much they could do for him. He was pronounced dead at the hospital. Apparently, his death was somewhat suspicious, and that's why my manager was being contacted. It was evident that the man had been struck on the head by something or someone. The old man had receipts in his wallet from our bar, and naturally the police thought that our place would be a good starting point to begin their inquiry. The officer asked the manager if he had noticed anything strange about the old man's demeanor, or if he acted differently. The manager answered no. I guess he didn't pay the old man much attention or didn't speak to him all that much that night. It transpires that the old man had suffered a head injury before he came to the bar. He then interacted with us and collapsed after he left. So was that why you were behaving so strangely? I wondered. So when the old man said, "You'll see to whatever's left, won't you?" did that mean something? The way he smiled, that's what will always stay with me. Did he know? Did he know that he was going to die? Was it predestined? Maybe he knew based on his head injury and there wasn't much time left for him. Maybe he knew based on his head injury that there wasn't that much time left for him. Maybe he wanted to go to the place that made him happy. Hey, maybe I'm reading too much into this, but those words he said will always stay with me. We were able to notify his next of kin. It was a really good thing we were asked, because he was sort of an enigma in town, and apparently not that many people knew him. Hopefully I succeeded with his request in that respect. We toasted his memory on the following night shift. And that was that. This happened when I was in the lower grades of elementary school. Now, back when I was little, I used to share a room with my sister. We had a kind of bunk bed situation going on, and because she was the elder sister, she got the top bunk. Why was that such a coveted thing back in those days? I have no idea. Anyway, so one night I was lying there in the bottom bunk, and I called out to my sister. I know I wanted to know if she was awake, but I have no idea what I was going to talk to her about. My sister didn't reply. I guessed that she had just fallen asleep. From that age up to present day, whenever I get into bed, I end up thinking about things, and then I become unable to sleep. When I couldn't sleep at that age, I would just stare up at the slats in the bed above me. After a while, my eyes would become accustomed to the darkness. I would sometimes look around our bedroom to see what I could see in the dark. That night, I gradually scanned my eyes over the room, and then a black object came into my field of vision. It scared the hell out of me, to be honest. But I tried to remain calm and keep my composure. But I would be lying if I said that I didn't feel my heart pounding in my chest. When I looked at the black object directly, I quickly understood what it was. It was my sister's long, dark hair hanging off the side of the top bunk, dangling down. I smiled to myself and went back to looking at the slats above my head. I then did a kind of double take because something dawned on me. There was something wrong. The hair that was dangling off of the top bunk seemed longer than my sister's hair. Not by a couple of centimeters, I'm talking about a good 20 centimeters, a good 7 inches. My heart resumed pounding. I shut my eyes, and then I opened them again. I opened them slowly. I didn't want to open my eyes, but curiosity got the better of me. I stared at the hair. It wasn't my sister's hair. I knew that deep down in my heart. We did each other's hair all the time, and I knew exactly what her hair looked like. When I opened my eyes, the position of the hair had changed. It was clearly not the back of someone's head. What I thought I was looking at was the back of my sister's hair dangling over the side of the bed, but in actuality, what I was looking at was the front of someone's head with the hair dangling off of the top bunk. The head slowly and silently moved into a position where it was peering down at me over the edge of the top bunk. The long dark hair was hanging off the head towards the floor. The eyes of an unknown woman locked into mine. The upside-down face of an unknown woman in my dark bedroom caused me to panic and become completely stone-like in my bed. I literally couldn't move. I felt as if I was paralyzed to the point where I couldn't even breathe. My muscles felt so hard they began to shake with fear. All the while, this unknown woman glared at me like some kind of snake. I was really panicking, but I knew I needed to do something. I shut my eyes, summoned all my inner strength, and screamed for my mum. I felt like that scream came from the bottom of my stomach. It gave me the power or courage to leap out of bed and race to my mum's room. I slept with my mum that night. And up until we moved house, I went to bed as early as possible every night. I didn't want to be the last one awake, or be up late because I thought that woman would come back. I remember her face so clearly. It's hard to explain. Maybe even harder if you don't know the example of who I'm talking about. But I will say that she looked like a famous athlete we have over here in Japan, called Tani Ryoko, but she didn't smile like Tani Ryoko. She was just something else. Anyway, here's a photo, if it helps. Keep in mind, I was about 7 or something when this happened, and my sister was only a year older than I was. So I'm unable to convince myself that seeing that face was a trick of the light. The sad thing about this was, whenever I saw Tani Ryoko, I got the chills. I still do now. She didn't even do anything. I don't know. Sometimes I think maybe our home had a history. I didn't see the unknown woman again, and I can only thank all the known gods for that. This happened when I was in high school. I used to have to go to these after-school classes that my mum planned. I hated it at the time, but now I get why she was making me do it, now that I'm older. Sometimes on the way home from cram school, I would be asked to pick up a couple of items from the convenience store, everyday kind of things. I ended up going in there every now and then, just out of habit. I read the magazines and the manga, and just looked around to break up the evening a little. I mean, I wasn't ever in a rush to head home to start my homework. I was heading down the street as usual, and then I heard the thunder of footsteps coming down the street behind me. I thought to myself, oh, I forgot the change at the register or something. Hi, Jay here, and this actually happens a lot in Japan. If you forget the change or try to tip, you will likely be chased down the street by a staff member, eager to give you your money back. Happened to me once. I accidentally left a 10-yen coin on the table in a restaurant and someone chased after me to give it back. Back to the story. But then I realized something. I didn't buy anything, I was just looking around. My next thought was, oh God, did they suspect me of stealing something? In my mind, I decided that I hadn't done anything wrong, so I assumed that the clerk was running down the road for a different reason. But no, I was wrong. She wanted to speak to me. The clerk was female, and she ushered me back to the store by pleading and apologizing. I didn't know what was happening, and I was a high school kid, so I just thought I'd better do what she said. I didn't want to be in trouble. We went through to a back room of the convenience store, some kind of staff room, and she said, "Sorry about this, but I saw something, and I just couldn't live with myself if I let you go without telling you." So I was sat down in the staff room, and I had little other choice but to listen. I can't remember everything, so I'll just try to give you the bullet points of what she said. She said that she had seen something on one of the security monitors. She said she saw a ghostly apparition appear behind me on the monitor. She said that apparition then appeared right in front of me and appeared to be beckoning me through the door and out of the store. She said she saw that ghost or whatever it was start violently beckoning when I was walking out of the door. According to her, it was dragging me outside. She was scared that something terrible was going to happen to me. I really had no idea how I should take that news. My immediate thoughts were, can I go home? I just want to go home. You know, stuff like that. So I just nodded along and tried to feign a serious look of contemplation. I guess that I'm not that great of an actor though, because the clerk then held onto my arm. She must have seen the doubt on my face or something. She kept telling me to listen to her and to believe her. I started to get really scared. Not of what she was warning me about, but scared of her. She wouldn't let me go, and I didn't know what to do. On top of all this, she was really attractive, so I was mega confused as an adolescent boy. I ended up agreeing with her and just accepting her version of events. Though she was pretty, she had a very scary intensity about her, and I wanted out as soon as possible. Well, I don't know what to make of all that. I guess that if something was beckoning me or trying to lure me, then it hasn't worked. I haven't experienced any form of paranormal activity. The only thing that scared me about that day was the way the clerk acted. I mean, to chase a high school kid down the street just to try and convince them that a ghost was following them was, what can I say, a very unique experience. It's been many years since this happened, and now enough time has passed for me to get to a place where I can feel comfortable enough to share my experiences. I hope that maybe they can help someone, somehow. It all started when a co-worker I was good friends with came over to me at work and said that the manager of the building I lived in at the time was on the phone. I spoke with the manager of the building, and he told me that there was a woman at my home who claimed to be my mother, and she was asking him for the key to my apartment. He called me to make sure I was okay with giving her the spare key. Something was off. I knew that my mum would call ahead before visiting, for one, and secondly, she lived a plane flight away. There's no way that she would just randomly show up without at least sending me a message. The manager then said that my mum had told him, before he called, that she had come without telling me, and it was a sudden thing without a plan in place. She said she wasn't able to contact me before she set off, and she was sorry for the inconvenience. I told the manager that I wasn't sure. I mean, it seemed so strange and vague, and that's really unlike my mum. I said I would call my dad and try my mum just to make sure, and I would call him back in about 15 minutes max. The manager called back after about 5 minutes and said that the woman disappeared while he was on the phone to me. Now that creeped me out. I thought about that at work for the rest of my shift. Could it have been my mother? I guess there wasn't a 0% chance. No one picked up when I called home, but that wasn't unusual because my parents both had jobs, and it was the middle of the day when I called. I got back to my apartment later that night, and I gasped when I saw my door. The door had scratches in it. The door scope, you know, the peephole, that was cracked. It looked as if it had been hit by some kind of blunt object. I felt sick seeing that. The sheer determination someone had in their mind to get in. I was really scared and young. Instead of calling the police, I called my parents and confirmed that my mum hadn't come for a surprise visit. I was so overwhelmed by everything, I just left it as it was. I just wanted to put it all behind me. That would prove to be a mistake. I stayed with a friend for about a week. I would have stayed longer, but I knew I was being a burden, even if my friend wouldn't admit it. About a month went by, and one night I was woken up in the dead of night by a thunderous thudding sound. I sat bolt upright in bed and quickly realized that it was my door which was being blasted against. I heard the door rattling in its hinges. It was so terrifying. This time, I didn't hesitate. I called the police. I sobbed down the phone as quietly as I could, and they told me that someone would be arriving shortly. From the noises the person was making on the other side of the door, I could tell it was a male. The wait for the police was short but agonizing. The police arrived in minutes and were able to restrain and arrest him. The man had tools for breaking and entering. I think if the police were any later, then he could have gotten in. He had a crowbar and lockpicks. When the police told me that, I couldn't help but shudder. One saving grace perhaps would be that the man got incredibly drunk beforehand to summon up the courage to try and break in, and this ultimately made him fail in his attempt. When asked why he was doing this, he provided a strange stream of excuses. He first said that his girlfriend lived there. Okay then, so why'd you need to break in? Then he said that he got the wrong apartment. He lived there, and he couldn't get in. The police said that he lived miles and miles away from my building, so there went that excuse too. He then finally said something that made me squirm. He said that he was paid to break in by a woman he didn't know very well. My mind went back a month to the manager calling my building with a woman pretending to be my mum, asking for the spare key. The police were in touch in the coming weeks and months, but they couldn't ever find the woman or what her purpose or goal was. I really have no idea either. Well, as you might expect, I moved out of there pretty quickly. I don't even live in the same city anymore. It took a very long time to get used to the idea of living alone again. And my experience has really affected me, but I won't let it become me or consume me. I can't help wonder some nights about that woman. Who that woman was and why she was so adamant on getting in. I think if she was successful, I wouldn't be here to share this story. I'd love to hear any theories. Found this post on an old, now defunct message board. Managed to save it before the site went down. No clue if it's true, but it stuck with me, so I'm posting it here. It started on a winter night, the kind where the cold seeps into the walls, and no matter how high the heat is turned up, there's always a lingering chill in the air, especially when you live in a block of apartments. Fortunately, we lived on the ground floor, not one of the top floors. It was one of those nights where the windows would fog up completely, a thick layer of condensation forming from the temperature difference inside and out. Nothing unusual about that. Everyone's seen that before. It usually happens when you run the heater with the windows closed. I did something every night in winter. It was just routine. A quick wipe down of the windows with a cloth before bed. Just something to keep the moisture from pooling too much. So like normal, I pulled back the curtain, cloth in hand, and then I just stopped, like I was frozen. There, in the middle of the fogged up glass, was a handprint. Fresh. The kind that shouldn't be there. The shape still perfect. The 5 fingers clearly defined. Water beaded at the fingertips. Tiny droplets trailing down as gravity pulled them into thin streaks. The sight of it was so unexpected that for a moment, it was hard to think straight. I was just in a state of shock. The first thought was my daughter, but no, that wasn't right. The print was too big. Not massive, not an adult's size, but definitely not small enough to belong to a child. Somewhere in between. A size that didn't match any of the hands in the apartment at all. I put my hand up against it, and it was too big. My husband's hand even bigger. It made no sense. A sick, creeping feeling spread through my chest, the kind that comes when something doesn't add up, when the mind scrambles for a rational answer and finds nothing. I couldn't stand looking at it any longer, so I wiped it away without much more thought. A single motion, cloth across glass. I told myself that I was seeing things, and I was pretty happy with pretending that it hadn't ever been there. I thought that would be the end of it. But it wasn't, because it kept happening. Not every night, but often enough, and only in winter, when the condensation made handprints visible. Maybe in summer they were visible too, but just unseen. And that thought was somehow worse. Locking the windows became a habit, checking them, double-checking them, because the idea of something getting in was unbearable. The thought of someone standing outside, pressing their hand against the glass looking in, was just as bad too. But then came the realization, the worst part. The moisture had been dripping downward, meaning the handprint had been pressed from the inside. It was about shoulder height. It had never been about someone getting in. Whatever left those prints had already been in. It really freaked me out, but I was kind of glad that it wasn't someone on the outside. It wasn't some thief or stalker. After mulling it over for a while, I decided that that should have been the end of it. Maybe it was just some weird, explainable phenomenon. A few weeks later, I woke up to a loud thud in the middle of the night, the kind that yanks you out of your sleep. Heart pounding. It sounded like something heavy hitting the glass. My first thought? A break-in. Someone testing the window. A burglar. My illusion of safety was shattered. Maybe I was wrong about it not being a stalker or a thief. Instinct kicked in. I told myself to grab something, a golf club in this case, and creep towards the balcony. I strained my ears for any sound, any movement outside, but there was nothing. The city stretched beyond the railing of my balcony, quiet and still. The balcony itself was empty. No footprints, no sign of forced entry, just silence. Still, the unease lingered. The golf club stayed within reach for the rest of the night. Sleep didn't come easy after that. And then in the morning, something worse. I went to hang laundry on the balcony, only to freeze, call out, with my voice shaking. On the partition separating the balcony from the neighbor's unit, one of those reinforced panels, the kind that meant to be broken in emergencies, were footprints. Small, bare, a little bigger than child-sized. They started at the bottom and climbed upwards, perfect imprints, each toe, each curve of the sole clearly visible, like a child had walked up the wall. Near the top, one was deeper than the rest, pressed in so hard that the panels started to crack, like whoever or whatever had left them had slipped, almost fallen. Was there a child scaling the balcony in the dead of the night? If so, from where? The other side of that partition? Vacant, empty for months. There was no child there. But something had been here, something I couldn't explain or rationalize. I reported it to my building manager. I expected some kind of explanation, a prank, maybe, but the reaction wasn't what I expected. The manager frowned, muttered something about how it was strange. The unit had been completely cleaned after the last tenant left. Fresh paint, new wallpaper, no one had set foot in there since. And yet, the repair crew, the ones who replaced that damaged panel, found something. Dust. A thin layer coating the floor in that apartment. And in that dust, footprints. Small ones. Countless small, bare footprints. Only small ones. No adult prints anywhere. As if what had been in there had never left. The thought of that empty apartment, dark and silent while small, unseen feet moved across the floor was too much. The repair crew did their job, patched up the wall, swept away the dust, the door was locked again, and the apartment next door was left as empty as before. But somehow knowing what had been found in there made it feel even less vacant than before. My husband and I tried not to think about it, We didn't dare tell our daughter about it either. We just tried to go back to our normal lives. But some nights, late at night, when the city outside fell silent, something felt off. It wasn't loud. It wasn't even enough to fully wake me up most of the time, but it was there. The sound of soft, bare footsteps, faint but deliberate, moving across the floor. Our floor, not next door's. Every time the lights were turned on, the room was empty. The floors were clean. There were no footprints left behind, but the feeling never really went away. There was always that tiny lingering sense of something unseen that had been there all along and might never leave. This happened when I was in high school. It happened on a Saturday. That day, it had been raining non-stop since the morning. With little other options, I just texted my friends and played some online games with them. Before I knew it, it was the afternoon, and the rain hadn't shown any signs of letting up. When it got to around 7 p.m., I gave up all hope of going out for the day. It was still hammering down out there. I was lounging around watching TV at home, and there was an interruption to the scheduled program. It was a local warning, which told residents to be aware of potential flooding. We got that warning, I guess, at around 8 p.m. My family of 6 were all huddled in the living room together. We were just carrying on our night. I don't know why, but none of us seemed that worried by the warnings on TV. I don't know how long we sat there, but after a while, I heard a dull clicking sound, and then everything went dark. We were in pitch black darkness. My father stumbled off towards his bedroom, mumbling something about going to get a torch. He lit the way using the torch on his smartphone. My mother got up to look outside. The power seemed to have been knocked out for our whole neighborhood. It was so dark in the house, it almost seemed to amplify the sound of falling rain. It was still showing no signs of letting up, and it made me think about those warnings we heard earlier. Some of my family got up to find lights or to head back to their bedrooms to look out of the windows or to look for candles and battery-operated things like radios and torches. I stayed in the living room with my grandma for a while, and she said that we might need to evacuate if things get worse. I wanted to go get my phone so I could tell my friends what was going on, so I went back into my room and grabbed it. I was scrolling through some social media, and then I noticed that my battery was a little low, so I thought to myself, better stop and save the battery. I just spent some of the time looking out at the rainfall, listening to it. It was pretty relaxing, even though I was, and still am, a bit of a night owl. I started to feel sleepy. I remembered that I had an old battery charger in a drawer somewhere. I found that and put my phone on charge and killed time by reading a manga by torchlight. By that time, I heard no TV on downstairs, no chatter of the family. Everything was quiet. I guessed that the elders in my family had decided to get an early night. Maybe the rain wasn't going to be as bad as they said it would be on TV. It was about 10 p.m. when I heard the doorbell ring. It was late. We never really heard the doorbell ring at that time of night, but I guessed this was a different set of circumstances. I thought it might be our neighbor, Mr. Saito. He might have come over to see how we were all doing or to give us some information. Someone might be telling us that it was time to go, time to evacuate. I left my bedroom on the second floor and headed downstairs. I was surprised that it looked like I was to be the one who was to go and open the door. Maybe everyone else was still sound asleep. As I headed downstairs, I noticed something. There was a huge shadow behind the frosted glass of our front door. It looked very big and not like my neighbor. But just in case, I called out his name. Mr. Saito? Whoever that shadow belonged to behind the glass didn't reply. It just stood there. I started to get scared at that point because I knew it wasn't my neighbor or anyone else who was here to help, because why would you just stand there in silence? It looked like it was staring at me. Before I knew it, I found myself backing away from the door. I saw the figure shift from side to side, as if it was about to try the door. It was like my mind went blank. I ran as fast as I could upstairs to the safety of my room, and I slammed the door and stood behind it. And that was the first time in my life that I literally stood stock still, unable to think rationally, just in a pure panic. The doorbell rang again, and it felt as if my heart was about to flatline. I still remember it very vividly. Even when I think back on it nowadays, I can still see that dark figure behind the door. Just after the doorbell, I heard my father making noises downstairs. Finally, someone is up. I felt now brave enough to leave my bedroom and to listen to what was going on from the hallway. I leaned over the banisters and saw my grandfather and grandmother were joining my father down there in the lounge. I went down a few stairs to be in earshot, and I heard my dad say, "The doorbell rang, right?" Everyone was in agreement. Great, I wasn't hearing things. That's good. I fearfully looked towards the front door and I saw that the shadow was gone. That was really good. I was scared of thieves, you know? Opportunistic thieves that might be looking at breaking into homes. Some people in town might have already evacuated and their homes were stood unoccupied, a perfect chance for someone looking to break in. Then I heard the doorbell ring again for the third time. I watched as my grandpa opened the door. He must have gotten to the door in about 3 seconds, but by the time the door was open, there was no one out there. Grandpa quickly shut the door and I swear I saw a dark shadow pass by once more. Someone was out there. They probably weren't scared that the person they saw from wherever they hid was pretty old, and they probably thought that they could take Grandpa on if they had to. My dad was shocked. I could see the fear on his face as he ran upstairs right past me to wake up my mum and sister. My dad gathered all of us in the living room. Just as he was telling us to calm down, we heard a tremendous noise coming from outside. I heard tree limbs snapping and the sliding of something heavy. We lived in the shade of a big mountain, and I know now that what I heard was the sound of a landslide. The mud, boulders and trees on the mountain were soon to be heading towards our town on a river of rainfall. My dad was screaming, "Everyone in the car, let's go," stuff like that. We should have given more respect to the warnings we had heard on TV. I was thinking, please let us get out of here safe, and I promise I'll learn my lesson. I was young and terrified. I don't know who I was even pleading to. We piled into the car, and there were clumps of earth in the streets, sand everywhere. It was a real mess. Everything was just coming down, and the water was so fast, it was honestly terrifying. The roads were treacherous, but my dad managed to navigate through the path of destruction, and we got far enough away to feel safe. We later learned that our family home had suffered many damages. I'm certain that if we delayed leaving any longer, then any one of us could have been potentially swept away in the flood. It was a real close call. My grandpa has a theory, and it's one that I'm happy to buy into. I think everyone in our family believes it, but I guess to different extents. His theory goes like this. It wasn't a criminal at the door trying the doorbell. He said that it was our guardian spirit, because if it wasn't for that doorbell ringing, then I guess that none of us would have woken up, apart from me, and to be honest, I was content in hiding in my room, and I wouldn't have been able to evacuate the family. Had it not been for the doorbell, we might not have made it out to the car in time. We might have been trapped in our house, or we might have even been washed away in the floods. Come to think of it, should doorbells in houses ring when there's a blackout? I'm lucky to be here. I think we all are. So if that was a guardian spirit, thank you. The university I go to is kind of weird. There was some graffiti on one of the walls in the men's room that caught my eye. It's in the 4th floor of one of the buildings on campus. The building is pretty old. It's not like the modern buildings on the other side of the campus. I ended up using the men's room on the 4th floor one afternoon, and I read the graffiti I mentioned. I guess most people read what's written on the walls in the bathroom like me. I mean, there isn't really all that much else to do in there, is there? There was the usual kind of stuff like you might expect in a male bathroom stall, but I found that my eyes were drawn to something in the corner. There were some numbers, and those numbers were the following: 183, 450, 298. The last number had some dots after it. They were written spaced apart, and they didn't seem to make much sense to me. One thing that piqued my interest was the fact that they were sort of hidden. Unlike some graffiti that you might see in a football stadium bathroom or at train stations, these numbers were kind of tucked away from the natural places you might look at. It was like a secret, and that to me was pretty interesting. I wondered what it all meant, and who it was for. Somehow the numbers seemed a little familiar to me too, and it dawned on me. One of the numbers was my student number, hence why I'm able to remember. That's weird. I decided to take note of the other two numbers to see if I could find out if they were student numbers. If so, I planned on trying to find out who they were and what correlation, if any, they had with my student number. There's something else weird about my university. It seems that a lot of students who go here end up having accidents, some being fatal through choices of their own, if you catch my drift. Our university has some really weird energy, man, honestly. So I searched the other two numbers and I found that something had happened to the other two students. They had both died. It was weird, but I couldn't do anything about it. It was just one of those things. One more of the elements of my strange university's culture, I supposed. A few days went by and I found myself in need of the bathroom again. When I was near that building, I decided to head on up to the 4th floor. I don't know why. I just felt like checking out that graffiti again. I went to the same stall and sat down and looked in the corner where I saw it, and I was slightly surprised to see that there was something new this time. And this is what it said: 183, finished. 450, finished. 298, not yet. There were a couple more numbers that I can't quite remember now, but they had different little phrases next to them. It was something like, a little bit longer. It seemed like finished meant dead, based on what I knew about the other student numbers. I knew one number amongst the other new ones though. 361 was one of my friend's student number. His number had the words, not yet, written next to it. He had an accident recently. He came off of his motorbike, and he hasn't woken up yet. I'm really worried about him. Is that what not yet means? It was just too much of a coincidence from me. So after I visited him, I went back to our university and into the old building on campus. I went up to the bathroom on the 4th floor and headed into the stall with the numbers. I found my number and I used some Tipex or whiteout to cover it. I was scared that something might happen to me, and I just wanted to be on the safe side. Yesterday, I headed up there again. I wanted to make sure that no one had written anything new. I didn't want to see my number there again. I was so shocked to see that my number was back, and there was something else written after it this time. Something I hadn't seen until that point. Do not try to erase your number, 298. I don't know what to do about this, guys. I wrote a little something for my local newspaper. I was pretty proud of it, to be honest. I was overwhelmed when the newspaper contacted me and informed me that they had received some praise for my work. Back when this happened, I was a regular writer. I used to write about anything that took my interest. That meant that I read just about as much as I wrote. I was subscribed to all the major newspapers and journals. So you must understand that when I received a compliment, or whatever the best word to describe that is, I'm supposed to be a writer. Anyway, when I received an accolade for my writing, I was over the moon. I was so happy. The guy who called me to tell me the good news said that the person who praised my work wished to contact me directly. I said, yeah, sure, please pass on my information. Oh man, what a smart move that was. I received a letter at my home address from a guy in his 50s. I don't know how to best describe it, but the tone of his writing was serious, sober, earnest. The guy was honest. He wasn't gushing with praise either, he was just unrelentingly himself. He said that he was a writer for a minor newspaper. He sounded like, I don't know, a peer maybe, so I replied to him. Also, writing was fun, I thought nothing of it. I mean, how was I not going to reply to my first compliment as a writer? A few days after I sent my reply, I started to get strange calls, silent calls at first, but then I started to hear heavy breathing. It was gross. They started to become so regular that I decided to send most of my incoming calls to my answer phone. I got so sick of seeing my answer phone blinking and playing back these weird messages. One thing I could count on was the regular letters from the guy who praised my writing. It became a daily routine. He even wrote his phone number at the top of each letter. I didn't take much notice of it at the time, as I just assumed the two incidences were unrelated. We had caller ID. I saw the prank caller's number, but I didn't ever call it back. One day, one of these prank calls came during the day, and I happened to be on a day off, so I went over to take note of the number that was calling. I was horrified to realize that the number seemed oddly familiar. The digits were reminiscent of the ones I had seen at the top of the letter the guy in his 50s sent me in praise of my work. I thought, what? Why is this guy doing this? I decided to answer the call this time. I had one of the guy's letters on my desk so I could verify the number. This was the guy who was messing with me? When I picked up the phone, I heard the male voice chuckle like a drain. So I went on the attack. I said, "What the hell is this?" or something like that. There was nothing but silence on the line, and then, after perhaps 30 seconds or more, I heard a male voice say,
"Are you scared?"
I hung up. I couldn't deal with that. I was scared, but I wasn't going to give that creep the victory. In his letters, he was nice, professional, and gentlemanly. He was something worse on the phone. Something I didn't imagine, something that put me off writing. You'll note at the start I said I used to enjoy writing. I don't anymore. My husband said that he would be happy to reply to any letter from that creep, and I think it only took one letter or two from my husband to put a stop to that weirdo. But oh well. Yeah, at least it's over with. This happened about 10 years ago. It was during the height of summer, and 6 of us had driven out to a secluded campsite deep in the mountains. I'd been camping plenty of times before, so I was comfortable with the wilderness, confident in my ability to handle myself outdoors. We pitched 2 tents next to each other, 3 friends in each tent. After building a decent fire, we stayed up drinking beer, laughing, and chatting until well past midnight. The atmosphere was carefree and cheerful, and honestly the thought that anything strange or sinister might happen didn't even cross our minds. Eventually at about 1:30 a.m., we retreated into our tents. Inside, my 2 friends quickly fell asleep. Before long, the quiet of the mountain night was broken only by their gentle snores. I couldn't fall asleep right away though. The snoring from my friends was just loud enough to keep me awake. Restless and a bit frustrated, I lay there staring at the tent's ceiling, waiting for sleep to finally claim me. That's when I first noticed the sound. At first it was faint, so subtle that I nearly dismissed it. A gentle rustling noise, like a plastic bag being slowly manipulated or moved around. I remembered that we'd left some food wrapped in plastic bags outside near our cooking area. At first I thought it was probably an animal, a raccoon or something, investigating our leftovers. But as I listened more carefully, the rustling didn't sound random. It sounded deliberate, almost cautious. The longer I listened, the less sense it made. My pulse quickened slightly, and my curiosity began to mix with a creeping sense of unease. If an animal was out there, it would have likely knocked things over by now. Instead, the sound continued, steady, persistent, and strangely careful. Unable to ignore it any longer, I sat up and edged towards the tent's entrance. My heart was pounding softly, though I wasn't sure why. Something about the situation felt inexplicably wrong. My rational mind insisted it was nothing, just my imagination running wild because it was night. But a deeper, instinctive part of my brain knew better. Slowly and carefully, I reached the zipper of the tent, trying to make as little noise as possible. The metallic sound of the zipper felt shockingly loud in the silence of the night, and I paused several times, listening carefully to see if anything outside reacted. Finally, I peeled back the fabric just enough to peek into the dark clearing where we set up camp. That's when what I saw sent chills racing down my spine. Standing there, illuminated by a strange dimness, despite the complete darkness surrounding our campsite, were about 10 children. They stood clustered together, perfectly still, not moving, not speaking, simply standing and staring towards our tents. Their presence was utterly impossible. We were miles away from any town or village, deep in a mountainous region where no children could have possibly wandered at this hour. And their clothes, they looked oddly outdated, as if they belonged to another era. Their faces were expressionless, blank, but their eyes reflected faint glimmers from the dying embers of our campfire. The moment I registered their presence, a wave of dread and revulsion washed over me. Every primal instinct screamed that I was seeing something forbidden, something I absolutely should not be witnessing. My breath caught sharply in my throat, my body seized by an overwhelming fear unlike anything I'd ever experienced. Quickly I pulled away from the opening, quietly zipping the tent flap closed. I sat there frozen, hardly daring to breathe, straining my ears to listen to whatever might happen next. Would they come closer? Would they speak? Would they try to enter our tents? Minutes passed, painfully slow. The only sound was my friend's continued snoring, oblivious to the terror unfolding just outside. After what felt like an eternity, the rustling outside seemed to fade away, leaving nothing but heavy, oppressive silence. I don't know how long I sat there, paralyzed by fear, waiting for dawn. But when morning finally came, I cautiously unzipped the tent again. Outside, everything looked normal. The bags were exactly where we had left them, untouched. There were no footprints, no signs of any disturbances. It was as if the children had never been there. I hesitantly asked the others if they'd heard or seen anything strange during the night, but they all dismissed my story, laughing it off as a nightmare brought on by too much beer. But I know what I saw. To this day, I still have no explanation, but since that night I've never camped again without remembering those silent children standing perfectly still in the darkness. And even now, years later, when I hear a rustling sound at night, no matter where I am, I feel that familiar chill creeping down my spine, reminding me of what lurks just outside the tent.